Well, hello and good evening, and welcome to our weekly recap here at Reading the Receipts, where we go over all of the week's drama and legal filings in the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni legal case. So, hello, chat. How are we all? Good to see you all. Hey, hello, God, it's me, Sarah, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Vander V, All Scientist, Mossy Jinx. Good to see you all. All right, let's start out with our usual disclaimer. We're about to look at some legal documents, but I am not a lawyer. I'm certainly not your lawyer, and this is not legal advice. All of the allegations we're going to talk about today are just that. They're allegations. Nothing's been proven in court, and nothing we talk about should be taken as fact. This is all just opinion, my opinion, provided for entertainment purposes. All right. Ooh, we're a little loud tonight, chat. Let me pull that down. Let me go there. A little better? Still a little loud. Okay. Let me know if I'm too quiet, chat. That looks about right. Okay. So what do we have this week? So last week I talked about I was going to look at the Jones Works versus Abel case. Didn't get around to that. There was a bunch of motions to dismiss that were filed this week. And so I wanted to kind of talk about those instead. We are still a little hot on the microphone. There we go. So I want to talk about those instead. I will push the Jones Works stuff till next week. I don't necessarily think it's going to be as interesting as this stuff, so that's why we're doing this week. Because we had a couple of important things, right? We had Wayfarer responding to Ryan Reynolds' motion to dismiss and Blake Lively's, and then we also had Blake Lively responding to Jed Wallace's motion to dismiss. And there's some good pieces in there that I think are worth exploring. So that's why we're doing that tonight instead. So sorry for the bait and switch from last week, but this was more important. All right, so let's get started. So yeah, we're going to start out with the response to Ryan Reynolds' motion to dismiss. I do not have my screen set up correctly right now, so give me 1 second. Normally, I am a lot more organized than this, but I have my notes. So how are we doing, chat? Everybody doing good? Jed Wallace, who does not exist. Yes, we covered this last week. Nobody knows who he is or who hired him or what he was doing, but he was there doing something. All right, so let's get into the Ryan Reynolds opposition to motion to dismiss. So I think this has been talked about a lot. They start out here with, there's a lot of where Wayfarer tried to mimic what is happening against them from the Blake Lively side and do so really badly. And this kind of summarizes what's going on at this point. Ryan Reynolds included the quotes from Justin Baldoni, kind of using his own words against him. And so they try and do the same here and include this quote from Ryan Reynolds, say, hey, we can do it too. And they use this quote here: I realize that I'm too big to fail at this point, so I crush my enemies and drink their blood. Like, oh, he's so vicious. The problem with this quote is, first off, this is very clearly humorous and satirical. Like, he's not being serious here. It's also not the correct quote. You wouldn't know it because if you try and click the link don't work. They have messed up the link in here. Let me come back up here. It's got a space in it. It's missing a hyphen in it, so you would never find it based off what he had done. Oh, and I'm not finding it either now. Okay, 1 moment. Let me go pull it up. But anyway, it comes from this chat that they had a press conference for the Deadpool and Wolverine, and they ask, Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman to look into each other's eyes and talk about what you love and hate about the other person. And he talks about, like, he genuinely admires Hugh Jackman, that he's this big movie star, but he was still kind of, really nice to everybody and kind of down to earth. But now that he is much bigger than Hugh Jackman and he's sort of the Death Star to Hugh Jackman's X-Wing, that he said, I've learned the lessons and I've realized that, yeah, I'm too big to fail at this point, so I just kind of crush my enemies. The blood of my enemies I'd like to drink. But the Guardian gets that quote wrong, which is not surprising because if you know much about the Guardian, they are well known for getting this stuff wrong and lots of spelling errors. Or back in England, we call them like the Grundian. because of that. But yeah, so the quote that they use in The Guardian is the one that's in here, but it's not a direct quote from what he said. So, and then they can't get the link right in here either. I think I can put it in here because I remember what was wrong with it. I come in here, this was wrong, and then to London had another hyphen, get rid of the dot. Yeah, there we go. So you can come in here and then, you know, this is the Guardian quote that they include in here, but it's not the quote from what they actually say. So, like I say, kind of typical that we see from Wayfarer right now. I mean, like this is copy and paste at this point. This should be much easier than this, but is what it is. So we carry on as we start, unfortunately. And so they talk about this, and where are we? Through freely allowed. They come in here that, you know, and say, well, look, we're firmly belief that, you know, he hasn't got a successful motion to dismiss here, and that, you know, we've definitely pled our claims correctly, and then immediately, in the alternative, any defects or awful pleading can be remedied by amendment. Which, if you've seen all of Wayfarer's other motions to dismiss at this point, you know, expect about 20 different pleadings to be allowed to leave to amend their complaint. It's totally fine. There are no defects in it. It's fine as it is. We just like to go and do a better job. And they had to add in, which is freely allowed. That's not the case. There's just not liberal means to go completely amend. You get one freebie, and then after that, everybody has to either agree or the judge has to allow and grant leave to amend. Again, though, I mean, this is like weeks in now of them asking for leave to amend, and they can totally amend. There's no amended complaint attached to any of these. So they keep telling us they could totally amend this. It would be easy to amend this and fix it. But like, why? They haven't. You're catching up at 1.5 times. Baldoni's response to Ryan Reynolds, wow, it was just, yeah, it's cringe. It's bad. I find referencing error personally something. How hard is it? Copy, Control C, Control V. Yeah, it shouldn't be, or at least like just go confirm that the quote you're quoting is correct. You would think in a legal document they would at least check that. Talk about a desperate attempt to be one of the cool kids in a lawsuit. Also, literally the most obvious joke comment, right? He's not running around like actually talking about crushing his enemies. And yet, I don't know, they thought it was a good look. But anyway, they go on to here to say that they've gained additional information to plead further facts to support each of their claims against Reynolds, as well as the need to apply California law. So one of the things at this point is it's becoming increasingly clear that they are abandoning their amended complaint completely. As much as they, in the motions to dismiss, talk about how it's totally fine, at this point, they're continually kind of saying, like, not only should we be allowed to fix the defects, but we've got a ton of additional information now. We've got so much more. We're going to plead further facts. We're going to add in that even Wayfarer themselves now are admitting that at this point, their first amended complaint is defective. It doesn't actually carry all of the complaints and pleadings that they want to include. And so they need to go to be able to go fix it, which again, though, the question is, then go fix it. At this point, just ask to go amend your complaint instead of dragging this process out. Now, one of the things I think that's going on is, I don't know if you remember, but when Friedman talked about why they didn't file a motion to dismiss, his press statement was this like completely bombastic reply of like, we're not going to give Blake Lively's legal team the insight to know how defective their complaint is and how to fix it. So we're just going to answer it, and they'll find out at court how stupid they've been and how we're going to completely destroy them, right? Just this really braggadocious bragging. I actually think that Friedman here was actually giving away Wayfarer's legal strategy. And I think at this point, the only reason that they have not asked for leave to amend their faulty complaint that they themselves now admit is defective because it doesn't carry all of the additional information they have and further facts that they want to put in there, is because they want to go through this motion to dismiss process. They want to see what the defects are, and also where Judge Lyman kind of lines on some of these arguments, so that then they have a cheat sheet to know what pieces to fix and go back and go do. I really think they were telling on themselves, because at this point, this is the only reason for them to be dragging this process out, to be incurring all these extra costs, to be putting forward in all of these responses, when they could at this point have just said, hey, don't worry, ignore the motions to dismiss. Can we just amend our complaint, get on with it, take another crack, put forward it, and then say, hey, we've got all this additional information, and do it? Because Judge Lyman at this point has been incredibly fair. I don't see him not granting a motion to amend. So I can only assume the reason to drag it out is so that they can start taking notes and go, oh, that's wrong, that's wrong. Okay, we got to fix this. Anyway. I feel like I watched the video and the answer to Hugh was genuinely quite touching, and I don't even do the Deadpool movies. Yeah, it was kind of nice, like the two of them bonding, especially like the looking in their eyes kind of thing. I think there's definitely a genuine friendship underneath it. But yeah, all right, so let's go into what did I have? Now I'm lost at what I said. Okay. So they kind of come into where we're at and said, okay, they're again asking for the California law applies, because, you know, all the people who were injured by this all are in California, and that, you know, they're going after Reynolds because of his claims for defamation. So they're coming in here about the group pleading. Oh, that was further up. Or was it? Okay. So in the other pleadings, they kind of rolled in, hey, you know, right, like in Ryan's motion to dismiss, he says, hey, look, New York Times and Sloan have already kind of handled the group pleading. We're rolling their arguments into our FAC, into our motion to dismiss without having to make them, right? So this 35-page limit, they're saying, hey, go see them for that pleading. We're also including it, but we don't want to devote time ourselves to, you know, putting that on the pages. It's a kind of a bit of a cheat, right? To get more into your argument, but not waste your 35 pages on repeating arguments that have already been made. So again, in the same way as like turning the quote around, Wayfarer again tries to play the Uno reverse and says, all right, well, if Ryan Reynolds is saying, hey, I'm incorporating the references made in the other parties that the group pleading, well, then we're going to incorporate all our responses to the group pleading into ours, so we don't have to waste pages responding to that argument. We can just say, go see the arguments we made in those other oppositions to motion to dismiss. And they say, in particular, the Sloan parties in the New York Times. The problem here, and I went to go look at this, is when you look at the Wayfarer's opposition to group pleading, there's not a lot in here. It basically says, well, the New York Times complains of group pleading, claiming it cannot tell the allegations against it from the co-conspirators. It is premature to require that Wayfarer parties specify what acts were taken by the New York Times in connection with its scheme. They're trying to say, well, we can't tell you who did what. We don't have any evidence for who did what. So we have to necessarily group plead because we don't have a clue. And then they basically say, well, and if you do find that the group pleading argument is a defective part of our pleading, well, then we should be given leave to amend. That's their whole argument in the motion, in their opposition to the New York Times motion. In Sloan's, it's the same argument and response. Again, they basically say it's premature to require Wayfarer to specify who did what, which is what they have to do. A jury will decide. Until then, Wayfarer parties have done more than enough to make their allegations clear and can easily amend if based on further details of what they've done. So the response to Ryan Reynolds, again, on the group pleading is just that, well, we shouldn't have to be able to make specific claims against specific parties. We should be able to figure that out once we get discovery and find some evidence. But if you do think that it's wrong, then we should just, you know, be allowed to amend. And they reiterate again in their defense, any defect can be cured by amendment. So they're really just not putting forward a strong argument against this. And I think that group pleading is going to be pretty compelling in getting the parts of this either dismissed or told to go amend it and go fix this. And you sound normal again. At 1.5 is quite humorous. Even if the judge is fair, my lady says, I can't imagine him not getting annoyed by this. I don't know, right? I don't know. We haven't seen much from Lyman. We haven't seen his temperament from the phone call that they had. He seemed to be wanting to make sure that everything was as above board, as fair, as even-handed as possible, and also as transparent for the public. He kind of really wanted to emphasize that he wants this to be, given the high profile of this case, like to be as fair and as possible. So I think at this point, like just fix it, just amend it. Who's to say who defamed who or extorted what? Sue first and ask questions later. Yes, Marcy, that appears to be Wayfarer's approach here, because they don't really kind of give you much detail on what the things that were said. All right. So we did that. California, page 16. Defamation. Okay, so page 15 coming into 16. Okay, so they're coming in to basically say they defend this claim against Ryan Reynolds, and the defense from Ryan was, yes, no, not yes. If I called him a predator, then I did so fully believing it to be the truth, without malice, and it's a true statement based on his earlier messages. So the Wayfarer coming back and saying, well, look, this is defamation per se. We don't have to specify the damages or how it was damaged and what, because it is presumed. So there's certain kinds of defamation. Look at me, been reading up this week, where defamation is assumed to have damage and reputational damage. So things like alleging that somebody committed a crime, alleging sexual misconduct. So on the face of it, calling somebody a sexual predator would be defamation per se. Now, in there, they kind of expand upon the definition of defamation in California to say that it would be either a written or oral statement, published or communicated, I think is probably a better word, because published kind of makes you think, oh, it has to be in a newspaper. No, communicated to a third party, that either there's some negligence in saying something that is untrue. They either were negligent in figuring out the truth, or they were intending malice, like they deliberately said something isn't true, and that the statement itself was true. Where am I going? Actual malice and falsity. Yes. Okay, so we get to what they actually was said. Now, for the first time, we kind of get a little more details around it. This is all in the timeline, but they named the agent that Reynolds had talked to, Baldoni's agent, and said his name was Danny Greenberg, and that, you know, they talked to him on July 15th, and that on the call, Reynolds referred to Baldoni as a deranged predator and warned Greenberg that Baldoni should not attend the film's premiere next month because nobody wanted him there. If you remember, like, this was the ongoing conversation that Wayfarer were having, where the cast and Lively did not want him there. They were going to boycott, and Wayfarer were trying to figure out and negotiate a solution. The second statement was on July 22nd at the Deadpool and Wolverine premiere, when Reynolds told a senior WME executive that by representing Baldoni, WME was doing business with a predator, with a sexual predator. And they kind of said that, hey, you know, we've stated this twice. We don't know why Reynolds is saying, hey, given this specificity, it's unclear why Reynolds cites cases involving allegations of thread bearers to omit the time, place, or listener. His defense was, I don't even know, like, the specifics of what you're talking about because of it. And they're saying, well, no, we've been pretty clear. The problem is they haven't. In Baldoni's original New York Times complaint that they filed in California, I think it's agent, when they were talking about, oh no, let's search for Deadpool. Sorry, I didn't have the page up. Okay. Their original claim was that Baldoni received word that during the premiere of his movie Deadpool and Wolverine, Reynolds approached Baldoni's agent at WME and demanded that the agent drop Baldoni. So originally, the first version of his complaint was that at the Deadpool and Wolverine premiere, Reynolds approached Baldoni's agent and told him to drop Baldoni. That changed when we got to the 179-page complaint that he filed in the Southern District of New York. They changed to Baldoni received later word during his premiere of Deadpool and Wolverine. Reynolds approached Baldoni's agency, namely an executive at WME, and expressed his deep disdain for Baldoni, suggesting the agent was working with a sexual predator, and at a later date, and then switched back to demanded that the agent drop Baldoni. So they change and insert this piece between the two. So they have changed their story on what was said to who and where. And now, like I said, they're adding in, oh, there was this call and he said deranged predator. But they've consistently said that he called him a sexual predator twice, but now we're saying it was deranged predator and sexual predator. So again, the story is kind of shifting. And I wonder if when they originally filed that New York Times complaint, they didn't have all the details, and only now are they starting to get some of the details by talking to people of what was actually said and when. Let's see what Chet says. Please let us amend. We're not actually asking to amend at this time, right? They're like, would you let us amend? Can't we kind of? We don't know. It's not defamation per se because it's true, but also it can't be defined. I have friends who are very successful in treating a cop. I think they're never broke a law, and it's not defamation if I believe it. I don't know. I mean, like Wayfarer arguing that even if he does believe it and it's true, that it is problematic and defamation. I kind of swayed by that a little bit, but I don't know. This is where the law people kind of come in. The agent has denied being at the Deadpool and Wolverine or choose a better venue. Yeah, because originally they said it was the agent, and the agent wasn't there, but the WME executive is, so that's why they switched it and had to change their story. I forgot about the story changing on account of keeping track of all the other times they changed their story, right? Like, and this is the thing, we'll get into this a little bit later, like they keep changing what their story is, so how are you supposed to know? All right, page 18. So the piece that they're kind of coming to now is, well, it's not just those two statements that Reynolds made. Again, part of the argument is, look, you're not being specific, you're not saying who said what. Wayfarer again kind of dodging this argument and saying, well, you are collectively all responsible for all of the statements made by everybody. So in here they talk about Reynolds and his co-conspirators made statements to third parties, including to the New York Times, that the Wayfarer parties engaged in, permitted, or failed to prevent sexual misconduct toward Lively and retaliated for her reporting the alleged misconduct, including by spreading lies to damage Lively's image. But they've never shown us what those other statements are. They keep insisting that there were other statements made to other people, to other press agencies. We've never seen what they are. And even here, they don't actually go into any detail about what it is. They continue to then also say, okay, the Wayfarer part allegation that basically because Reynolds defamed one of them, they want to argue that he's defamed all of them. So, as alleged, all of the Wayfarer parties have become figures of infamy because of Reynolds' statements, because they widely disseminated and understood to refer to them. It's hard to see how comments about Baldoni specifically, and in this context, would be understood to be about the entire Wayfarer parties, like all of them. I don't see how Jennifer Abel is impacted by him saying Baldoni is a sexual predator to Baldoni's agent. I don't see how that's supported anywhere. But what they do is they argue that basically there's this small group exception of the group defamation doctrine. And they argue and quote this piece here. And I got really confused. I had to read this a couple of times. So we'll go through with me and let's see if chat follows me with it. An individual belonging to a small group may maintain an action for individual injury resulting from defamatory comment about the group by showing that he's a member of the group. This seems to be the exact inverse of what he's trying to argue here. He's trying to argue that all 7 Wayfarer parties, Reynolds defamed them all, but his comments specifically were about Baldoni saying that he was a sexual predator. They're trying to say that the group has been implicated in defamation because of being attached to this individual. But the group defamation doctrine is the opposite. So I actually went to go dig this up. I was like, am I not reading this right? And there's definitely moments of this, right? Like, this is law. I don't know law. And the one that kind of came up that they're citing here is an incident where a principal at Titan Tire Corporation we held a press conference and announced that Titan was filing a RICO lawsuit against the United Steelworkers of America, local unions, and about 100 employees who had filed fraudulent disability claims for hearing loss. Those employees are about 50, so I think he said 58 of them. He then handed out copies of the RICO lawsuit, which then specified the names, places, and residence and positions of the employees. So he is saying, hey, we're going after these 100 employees who have filed fraudulent disability, and then hands out a piece of paper with their names so you can identify who they are, and alleged that all the employees had committed mail fraud by sending them their fraudulent claims through the mail. 58 of the employees then filed an action saying that he had defamed them. And the idea being, he says, well, I was talking about the group, not individual employees. But the issue was, because he handed out that piece of paper that had the employees' individual names on and identified them, it was held that because they belonged to that group, they were defamed, right? That by defaming a group and you are attached to that group, you can then have you can claim an injury, you can appeal for an injury against you because of that. So this case that they're trying to cite, the application would be Reynolds saying that Wayfarer are a bunch of sexual predators that then would defame, of course, Baldoni, Heath, Abel, anybody associated with them in the Wayfarer parties. But that's not what happened. He defamed an individual, and they're trying to claim that it covers and injures the entire group, and that's not what this is. This is one of the few places where, looking at their basis in law that they're citing, that it was just this is bogus. This is really obviously bogus. But anyway, I don't know. Chat, let me know. Am I following that right? Am I missing something here? Because an individual belonging to a small group may maintain an action for individual injury resulting from a defamatory comment about the group by showing that he's a member of the group. This is the other way around. Defaming a group injures the individual, not defaming an individual injures the entire group. This is wild. All right. So they then kind of go on to add, well, the part of the problem of Reynolds trying to cast his opinion, right, that calling him a predator is opinion, is that he was giving these statements that were implied to have undisclosed facts, right? That essentially the expectation of the listener would be that Reynolds had some information they didn't, and it was based on something else to know. And they kind of come in to basically say that the context of his wording was to talk about "it ends with us" specifically. I think we'll see that in a little further on. And they also argue that, look, his deep disdain for Baldoni, right, him genuinely believing this, doesn't mean he can't be defamatory, because, that actually supports an inference of actual malice. That if you have deep disdain for somebody, you would say something maybe that isn't true or want to hurt them and injure them. And this is why I was saying before, Jennifer, I'm like, I think that, yeah, that feels reasonable to say. I don't necessarily think, as much as I enjoyed Reynolds' motion to dismiss saying oh, I think it's true, so I can't be held defamatory. I don't think that necessarily is supported. And yeah, I do think you could still have malice even if he genuinely believed it. If he doesn't have written consent, so it seems like egregious. I guess I'm missing the rest of all of this. I will scroll up to see. They're hoping everyone is illiterate enough to confuse things. I'm not going to comment. Is he implying the judge is illiterate enough to confuse things? Okay, that will be yeah, I think that's what is strange, because Ryan Reynolds' lawyers, right, the Blake Lively's lawyers, are going to have a chance to respond to this, and they will obviously point out that that's bogus, and it takes one line to shoot down his argument. Marcy Jinx says, look up actual malice standards. Okay, I will have to do that then and learn. Okay, so they argue that the allegations of him being that aren't substantially true. They go on to say that he argues from evidence that's not included, right? That he goes on to talk about Baldoni's book and podcast and YouTube appearances and use those quotes, and they argue, well, they're not allowed to do that because they're not been submitted in evidence. So they're not part of the original amended complaint, so you can't use them. He says, having just used this quote that's not part of the amended complaint. I don't get these arguments at all. Like, these seem very, very bad. Okay, so they pulled that in. They said that, okay, he can't use those quotes because he draws on the book, the YouTube, and the podcast, none of which are in the FAC. That's not true. Baldoni's book is in the FAC, and they talk about it. That, you know, if anybody who knows Baldoni would know from his book, and they quote both Man Enough and Boys Will Be Human. So they already, by inference, included those external references into their complaint originally. So it's not out of scope for him to be also using the same book that they insist you should have gone to know about Baldoni's porn addiction. Can we put a pin in not allowed to use Baldoni's works outside of court documents for later, specifically when we get to the footnotes in them? In response to Lively, yes, we can absolutely do that. Baldoni is a public figure and not a private person. The standard is different. Otherwise, the courts will be flooded with defamation cases. Yeah, that they actually have to have for malice. Like, yes, because, you know, you can say things that aren't true about a public figure. Yeah. I get you. All right. Page 22. It ends with us. Where was that? Did I miss it? I'm trying to find where I'm looking at about it ends with us. Was it in the notes? Not in the footnotes. 1523. It was what was on. It was. I got the page number wrong. That's why I couldn't find it. So yeah. So like I said, they're saying that Reynolds was reporting what happened on It Ends With Us to the WMA executive. But again, they don't include the full context of that statement. So how can we know? The only piece that we know is, again, and they talk it here, Baldoni is a sexual predator. But what's the context? How can we know that it was reportedly about what happened on the It Ends With Us set if they're not including the context? You know, Ryan could have happily said that, oh, I've read his books and it's clear he's a sexual predator. Or, you know, what do you expect with his history of being a sexual predator? Like, there's all of this that could make it that he was directly inferring from Baldoni's book and the YouTube videos and stuff. They haven't shown this. So I don't know how they get to say in their motion to dismiss, in their opposition, that, oh, no, he was specifically talking about this. Well, then show us what the quote was. Oh, the everyone who knows Baldoni has read his book. Yes, I don't think he does. Obi-Wan Kenobi says in his own book, his own words, he defines himself as a sexual predator. I was looking through that today, and I don't think he does. I think he's very careful about what he says in those incidents. He certainly infers it and talks about it, but he's very careful about not using the words like consent and boundaries about it in particular. And that's probably an editor saying that's probably not a good thing to put in your book. But yes, so again, they kind of go on to, you know, argue about the irrelevant submission of evidence is not proper, so that he can't add in this extra material to this motion to dismiss, which, as we talk about, we'll get to that in Lively's where they add that in. They carry on to say, again, they don't need to plead special damages. This was a response to Ryan's because it's, you know, as we talked about, defamation per se. So the actual defamatory statement by itself is believed to cause enough harm by itself. All right, what did I have in here? So again, they argue that, you know, they know all of this is not true. And that this is why it's all defamatory, is because they know the smear campaign narrative is not true. They know the sexual harassment isn't true. But as we talked about last week, they've admitted that essentially all of the communications that we've seen so far from Blake Lively are true, are accurate. They argue the context isn't true, but until we get the rest of that context, it is completely believable and understandable that seeing text messages about we want to bury her, we can't write that we will destroy her, here's a social media plan to go after her, here's fan posting, proactive fan posting to shift the narrative and put the focus on Blake Lively. All of that would be believed and likely. They keep insisting that no, everything is false, and that's why the defamation holds up. Again, I don't know how that works, right? With Blake Lively's complaint having to be assumed to be true in her lawsuit and the motions to dismiss, and then Baldoni's here, the counter has to be true as well. I don't know. They also then go on to say that because Reynolds also owns a marketing company, he should have been obviously known that it was Lively's bad press was because of her actions. But it's also true that if he owns a marketing company, he would be very aware of when bad press is because of somebody's bad behavior, and also when that bad press is inorganic. And when you look at things like sentiment and mentions online, the amount of interaction, and like all of us who are content creators have talked about, the complete number of like very brand new accounts with like 3 people following them that have shown up in comments to talk about this stuff. None of the response to this has been organic. Anybody who is in content creation or PR or marketing has all said the same thing, that this is completely out of proportion for who Blake Lively is and who Baldoni is. So I think it's a fine argument to have in his motion to dismiss, in the opposition to motion to dismiss. I think it's a fine argument to make. I don't think it's a good one because, again, when you look at people in PR who talk about this, they've all pointed out how inorganic all of this is. The podcast is worse and it's dicey if included as a reference. Yes, no, the podcast is definitely worse when he talks about what he did there. Yes. At the time, Ryan wouldn't have known about the defamation plan, would he? He'd still be mad about the harassment on set. Well, just their whole thing is that they are arguing that this was an elaborate plot from the beginning, from day one of getting on the set, that all of this was just to take control of the movie. Because again, in their timeline, they admit that Lively was being asked to, write pieces of the script. They talk about the one scene, the intimate scene that was filmed. Do I have his timeline open? I do have his timeline open. Okay, on June 22nd? May 22nd. They talk about, it's like June 3rd, I think. The one scene they did film that had nudity, this one, the bathroom scene. It's the scene in the movie where, Lively looks at herself with the marks on her face and takes a shower. It's a simulated nude scene. They did not have the intimacy coordinator for that scene. They admit to that, but they talk about here Lively, who had written the scene herself and then played a significant role in directing. So even before any of the protections were suggested, Wayfarer is saying that Lively was writing scenes herself, was directing, and so they have to make their timeline so much earlier that this is from day one that she was trying to take over the film. Even as in these opposition to motion to dismiss, they argue that the 17 protections were when she used that to manipulate and gain editorial control that she already had in the first half of production. It doesn't make sense, but that's at least their argument, and I will try and present it as fairly as I can. Okay. For this to be true, the conspiracy has to go over the top. Blake, Ryan, and Sloan all knew Blake was not harassed, and they all lied about it to third parties. Yeah, and that's basically what they're arguing. Okay, so false light statements 29. Trying to get through this because we got to get through the good stuff. Okay. Here we go. So in terms of the false light, they're arguing again that the Wayfarer parties allege that not only did Ryan's conspire to defame them by means of false and harm statements, so going back to the statements that were made to WME, they're calling him a predator and trying to pressure them to drop him, but they also are alleging that Reynolds and others conspired to place Wayfarer parties in a false light by means of false statements and distorting factual statements beyond recognition into falsehoods. So they're saying there's a bunch of other stuff we don't get to see it. Again, they're arguing that there's all of these other statements and stuff that they were doing. We don't know what it is. And in here, he's arguing that it's like, it's in his FAC at 162. Oh, his FAC, not that. But what he's referencing is the exact same events that he's talking about. So even as they're trying to argue and say, well, it's not just the statements to WME, it's not just the sexual predator comments, it's a bunch of other stuff he said and did. The pieces that they're referencing in the FAC are the exact same predator statements. And then the New York Times. I think that's it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the rest of the stuff is that they're arguing for in here. If there are these other factual statements, name them, show them out. Let's see what they are. But they haven't done it. But the big piece about this that kind of comes up is their whole argument, right, is that Ryan made these comments to WME in order to get them to drop him. That they had a contract, that Baldoni had an agency, a contract with WME, that Reynolds interfered with that in some way, got them to drop him. And, you know, Reynolds' argument was, or it feels weird saying Reynolds, Ryan feels better. But Reynolds' argument is that, well, look, you haven't even told us what the contract is or any of the details with it. How can I interfere with it when we don't know what exactly was breached in this contract or in what way? It was an at-will contract, so WME could drop you at any time for any reason, for no reason. So, like, it's how are you able to show that there was interference and damage to this contract? And so, you know, they come back and say, well, am I on the right page? 31? Yes, okay. That, you know, their threats and demands included telling WME to cease performance with them. And because talent agents are typically paid by commission, the reason I'm doing this is, we'll talk about this in a moment, but I want to leave some background here. They're saying that, look, they had an arrangement where agents get commission as a percentage of their clients' earnings, and then it would, because of that, it could be inferred that WME would fear its own economic harm from attack, and so there would be this injury to Baldoni and Wayfarer because WME would rather have that relationship with Blake and Lively, who they can get bigger contracts with and earn more commission from, than Wayfarer. But what's important here is they're talking about this arrangement of, they had an arrangement where a talent agent would get roles for them and they would get paid by commission. Okay. All right. Oh, that's what else I forgot about this. I forgot about this. Page 30, where was it? About the amend. Come on, where is it? Maybe I'm wrong on this. I thought it was like, oh, of course, this is it. Yeah. So having gone through the false light and said, oh, there are all of these other statements, and we have that, you know, there are all these other things that we definitely know about and we can definitely tell you about. They then say that, okay, well then, to the extent there's any defects, we can cure those by amendment, because, you know, we can add in the extra stuff. Of course, though, because the actions of Reynolds and his co-conspirators were carefully concealed, the less particularity is required when it appears the defendant has super knowledge of the facts. So they're again saying, we don't have any evidence. They're again putting in here, and then kind of come back to, the court should grant them leave to extend and don't deny it in its entirety. So they're again asking, yeah, we totally have more evidence. We've totally got this locked down, but please let us amend this because we don't know what we're doing. Okay, so yes, the commission. We talked about the commission is part of the percent. Okay. They then also come to the argument that Reynolds had made that they hadn't been able to kind of accurately detail this Tortious interference, right, about the contract, how, in what way, and how would it work. And they say, yes, proper categorization of that interference may depend on fact issues that cannot be yet resolved without discovery. Again, admitting they don't know. They're saying, look, we can't even tell you what kind of tortious interference that Reynolds did to us because we need more discovery. We need evidence. This does not warrant dismissal without prejudice. They argue that pleading in the alternative is a well-established practice, particularly where relevant facts may exist and are not readily ascertainable by the plaintiffs. Pleading in the alternative is a way for you to just basically throw out what you want and to make these claims that might actually be contradictory or whatever, because maybe that claim doesn't survive, but this one does. You can do this. It is not an open season for you to just claim whatever you want without any evidence or basis for doing it. And that's what they're trying to say here is this practice of pleading in the alternative, where you can plead a bunch of different arguments, doesn't necessarily mean that you can do whatever you want. And then, of course, they argue that dismiss it without prejudice and let us leave to replead. So it's another example of they don't really have a strong and compelling argument. They're trying to throw out as much as they can. We're getting into implied quasi-contract territory. Oh, just wait. Oh, just wait. Yes, lull at the verbal contract. Here we go. So this is where we talk about this. So 34. So they've been like really talking about this contract, and that he interfered with this contract by asking them to cease performing with them. And there's again, like he's saying, look, they're at will. They dropped you. That's not telling them to break your contract or breaching the contract, and you haven't actually shown a breach of contract. Wayfarer say, hey, actually, we don't have to. That they're actually arguing that cessation of performance isn't the same thing as a breach of contract, but they're arguing that it is, because somebody who interferes with the performance of a contract between another and a third person causes the third person not to perform the contract is subject to liability. Okay, this gets a little complicated. This was another one where I was reading this and I'm like, that doesn't seem to apply here, and actually went to go look it up a little. Did I keep the link in here? I don't think I did. Okay, well, you'll just have to take my word for it. So this case here that they're talking about, Quellenine versus Stewart, the title guarantee. What happened was a bunch of landowners were trying to sell land, and once they sold the land or got a contract for sale for the land, this title company was supposed to come in, give titles to the land to be able to complete those contracts. That title company continually didn't do that and neglected to, and wouldn't put title, either title or title insurance, I forget, on that land. And so it was interfering with the performance of the contract. So what they're talking about here is somebody who intentionally improperly interferes with the performance of a contract between one party and a third party, causing that third party not to perform the contract, is subject to liability. So this is where they're saying, look, if you come in and prevent that third person from being able to execute and complete that contract, the person that did the interference is liable for the injuries and the damages. That makes perfect sense, right? And if you're a little lost, think about, let's say you're an actor and you have a contract to perform on stage, and if you don't perform on stage for that night, you owe the production company $1 million, right? Because they want to make sure you're going to be there every night. And I lock you in a closet and prevent you from being able to perform that. I've interfered with you performing that contract. I would be liable for the damages you incur for not performing that contract. That's not what's going on here. Ryan talking to them and saying, hey, drop him, and then they drop him. He's not preventing them from executing the contract. They just dropped him and ended performance. So again, I don't see how this applies. And understand, again, I've talked about this a lot. I'm not a lawyer. So maybe there are some ways in which the broadness of these cases are actually applicable. And I've not seen this before in their pleadings, where like their quotes have been like, oh, this seems to fit. This is the first one where a couple of times reading through this, I was like, that doesn't logically follow. That doesn't seem to match. Expatriarch is learning so much Kelly labor law. I'm learning so much law. Like, this is one of the things I love, like, about kind of getting into these topics and things like this, is like, I will sit here and Google and read, and the process of learning and learning from other people who are much smarter than me, I love. So I love it. But I am still, absolutely, I don't know anything. So don't take me as, knowing what I'm talking about. But something like this where, like, you can imagine what this is talking about and the scenario, this doesn't match the scenario with Ryan Reynolds. So like, why are they including it in here? Maybe GPT wrote this one for them. I don't know. We need to go look for the ChatGPT hyphen, the M dash. Okay, so then the next piece is this piece, which is that where they talk about, look, Ryan's other argument that the specific details of the contracts are not sufficiently described and that Reynolds' knowledge of those contracts is alleged only in general terms are easily curable issues which they should be allowed to address by repleading, right? So here Reynolds is saying, look, they didn't give us the specific details of the contract of what's been breached or how it's been broken, and then why would I know anything about it or be able to interfere with that, right? And they're saying, look, let us replead it. And they put in a footnote, and this is where things get interesting, because the footnote is, under California law, a contract does not need to be in writing in order to be valid and enforceable. This is Wayfarer saying he didn't actually have a written formal contract with WME. He likely had some sort of verbal arrangement. There is a process called hip pocketing. Learning about entertainment and agencies and all the rest of the stuff now that I learned about this week. Somebody on Reddit basically tipped me off to this. They don't want their name mentioned, so I'm not going to, but somebody on Reddit tipped me off to this and said, take a look at this. Hip pocketing is when an agency doesn't want to have a formal contract with you, but will still find work for you. So they will, on an ad hoc basis, find you roles, find you speaking engagements, things like that. They'll get commission on all of the jobs they find you. So they'll make, 10, 20% kickback or whatever it is that you've agreed to. And anytime you get a gig or you make money, you just pay the agency for, like a finder's fee almost for getting you that role, that speaking gig, whatever it is. But you don't have like an actual formal contract with the agency. It's a verbal agreement. If that is the case, this puts in a whole bunch of issues for them. Them admitting that they don't have a written contract makes things a lot more difficult for them improving and making their case. Over on the Baldoni files, Kat Ortega, who's been doing amazing stuff, wrote about it and kind of talked about some of the issues. This might have been intentionally a temporary relationship. Was there a probationary period? So how long was this expected to run? Is this indefinite? Did it have a 1 year period? All of these kind of things. The other thing is, a big part of Wayfarer's response here is that because he interfered with this contract and they were expected to get other roles and get money, they have lost out on opportunities. But if this is not an actual formal contract, and if it's just a verbal agreement, there isn't any expectation that you would get a single other job, right? So the idea that you had lost millions in income or whatever by interfering with this contract goes out the window, because there was no formal contract. There was no understanding that there would be other roles. So yeah, it's a very strange thing for them to have omitted and put in here, to say that basically we can replead and cure the issue in that defective argument by basically admitting that we don't need to show you the contract because there wasn't a contract, it was a verbal contract. I mean, there's still details of that verbal contract that would need to be in there, but that if he is hip-pocketed, it makes it very difficult for them to kind of argue that he interfered and cost them all this money and all the rest of the stuff. Has Baldoni done much outside of Wayfarer since JTV? I don't think so. Justin Baldoni was dropped after the CRD came out. He was not dropped after Ryan spoke with WME, which was months earlier. Yes, great point, TR. Like, they point out that the comments that were made to WME were in July. He wasn't terminated until December. So they're also making the argument that somehow Ryan had all of this power to be able to influence WME to get them to drop him, but they didn't drop him until 5 months later. I think that's right. 4 months, 5 months. Somebody work me out on the math. But yeah, like it doesn't make any sense, especially given that, again, they keep saying, well, there's other statements that he made, but they haven't put them in here. We don't have any other dates. Where are the statements that they made through, August, October, September? Where are those? If you're saying that he got WME to do it, why did they wait 5 months after him saying that to drop him? Don't know. Okay. So again, they talk about, look, that he was going after WME and putting pressure on WME to drop him. And they say here, Ryan's attempts to downplay his defamatory statements that Baldoni was a predator and that WME was working with a predator are as insulting and therefore not wrong means. As discussed, his statements were defamation. Ryan ignores that the threats made to WME that the gloves would come off if the Wayfarer parties did not take the blame for the blunders of Reynolds and Lively, threats they carried out by defaming WME's clients, harming the Wayfarer parties and WME. They're now trying to argue that Reynolds actually not just injured Baldoni, but injured WME as well, because he made threats to, quote, the gloves would come off. That wasn't a threat that was made to WME, though. That was a threat that was made to Wayfarer and Baldoni, which WME passed on. Why then, if this is the case, is WME not suing Reynolds, right? If they cause damages to WME. WME seemed fine. They had no problem dropping Baldoni. Don't seem to look back since and don't really care and have not got involved in this. So if what he's saying here is true, then why aren't WME party to this? Why haven't they come on board? Why are they not suing anybody? If they really feel that this contract was terminated incorrectly, that they were being threatened and that they've been harmed by this action. It's a good question, right? It took WME a long time to decide if they wanted to keep occasionally skimming 10% off a Reddit. Well, look, this is a bigger problem I have as well, is that I think a number of people, not just WME, were aware of what's going on, Sony, and took time and did not really act until like the CRD complaint came out. We'll have to wait until this goes to court to find out who knew exactly what, but it's never good that people kind of wait. I understand not wanting to act based off things that you may not know, but it doesn't sit well that you might know this stuff for months before acting and only act when it's public knowledge. All right, so yeah, this is where they're talking about, look, it interfered with their economic advantage because their relationship with WME probably would have resulted in economic benefit. But again, if it's a verbal contract and there isn't like a signed contract, there's no guarantee of any economic benefit. There's no guarantee, I don't believe, depending on what their verbal contract is, that they would get any gigs. So I don't know, again, when they come in to go say, this is what it actually is, where that comes from. And then I think finally is just, they're making this argument that there's a conspiracy. The Wayfarer parties have pled ample allegations in connection with each cause of action against Reynolds to support the existence of a conspiracy at the pleading stage. For example, the FAC alleges that Reynolds and Lively made a joint threat to attack Wayfarer parties in the press unless they issued a self-immolating press statement, right? They asked them to issue an apology for general mistakes that were made in production. They have not shown any evidence of a conspiracy. I don't think we've seen a single message between Reynolds and Sloan. There's no understanding that the two of them were communicating or directing each other. And any, I think, communications between Reynolds and Lively, I think are privileged, is the other problem they have as husband and wife. I talked a little while ago about coverture, right? Our lovely common law understanding of coverture. One of the holdovers that's still left about coverture is, giving that protection under marriage of communications between the parent, between the spouses, and them not being able to implicate each other. I don't know if that's the right word, but basically you can't, be made to, expose and testify against your spouses and stuff like that. And so there's a whole bunch of legal protections that I don't fully know and understand around spousal privilege, that would make it very difficult for them to even get at the evidence of a conspiracy between Reynolds and Lively as husband and wife. So I don't know what they're doing here. So yes, so that's their motion, and then they basically say we absolutely shouldn't be denied give lawyers fees to Reynolds because the SLAPP laws conflict with the federal rules of civil procedure. This is where it gets really heavy with it. I don't fully understand the laws in here, so I don't know if this is a good argument or not. But but I think they've argued down at the bottom somewhere here and here that basically the Southern District of New York have kind of generally argued against finding and putting that burden on. So I don't know. It seems like that may not apply, but I don't know. All right. So that was the motion against the opposition to Ryan Reynolds. Next, we have, if I can find it, the response from Blake Lively to Jed Wallace, the man who does not exist. Before I do that, I'm just going to go run over to chat. Did WME hook Wayfarer up with Sony to distribute? Don't know. I don't know who did it with it. I don't think so. I don't think WME would do that. I think, given some of the other distribution deals they've had, I think they've gone and done approach individually and directly from Wayfarer. I don't think the WME approaches them in that way. I think WME is more about getting them acting gigs, speaking gigs, podcasts, TED Talks, stuff like that, things like that, I think. Would be hilarious if WME came in and said they dropped him because he wasn't popular enough to bother with. No, I mean, Ari Emanuel had already made that whole public statement, or I can't remember if it was a podcast or an interview or a speech, he was at a panel discussion or something, but he gave a whole thing about the reason they dropped him was because they saw the CRD complaint and were like, ooh, if this is true, these are not good people, and they dropped him because they were long-standing friends with Blake and Ryan, and kind of knew that, like, I know their integrity, I know their character, I don't know who these people are, I've never really been involved with them, I'm going to distance myself from them. Hi Sylvain. Justin Baldoni's team appears to be continuing the campaign. Another Daily Mail article that oh god. I saw that there's been like a bunch since like putting out their motions to dismiss. I think every day since, like they find another quote to pull and keep going. Yeah. On the face of it, there's like 5 reasons for them to drop him that have nothing to do with Reynolds' alleged comments. Yeah. Jones and WE have spousal privilege on overdrive. I think Jones had a hubby tell the RN agent to subpoena. They will never have to admit that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how that got all back to Lively to find out about the text message and go through it. And then Marcy Jinx says you can't compel spouses to testify or produce discovery against each other. They can if they want, but you cannot compel them. Yeah, okay. I knew there had to be something like you can, because obviously there's a lot of cases where spouses are against each other and can implicate each other. So it's just that they cannot be compelled to it. Got you. All right, so yeah, the opposition to Jed Wallace. This is kind of fairly straightforward. When Jed Wallace's motion to dismiss came out, I think I'd said that, like, I actually thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty compelling. I didn't think his main argument, which was, I pinky promise, I swear I didn't do it, was compelling. Because, you know, the main point of a motion to dismiss is you have to assume that all of the allegations in the complaint are true. And his whole thing was, they're all lies, she's lying, I didn't do it. Here's a sworn declaration saying I didn't do it, can I go now? And that's not compelling in the slightest. But his other argument about changing the venue to Texas, I didn't know enough, and it felt with enough compelling legalese in there to be like, sure, yeah, that feels good. Lively's, I think, response to it, I think, has kind of changed me a little bit on that, and we'll go through it and I'll talk about why. So, you know, the first big problem, and this is what I talked about, I think, in his motion to dismiss, he says, I didn't do it, I was not part of a conspiracy, I was just monitoring, I was not involved in this. Lively's, you know, opposition points out that they have the text messages and the emails that confirm he joined a conspiracy. You know, talking about the large shift on social due to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative towards shining a spotlight on Blake and Ryan. This is not passive monitoring of social media. This is an active change to impact and change the narrative. Them talking about, you know, the majority of socials are pro-Justin. It's sad because it shows you how much people want to hate on women. Like, they were all of this. Not just that, I think they also talk about it later in here as well. The messages where they talk about, you know, this is how much it's going to cost and getting Jed Wallace up to speed. Like, they were doing it all in the context of launching this social media manipulation campaign and, you know, what was it, proactive fan posting to counter the narrative? I can't remember if it was that or shift the narrative. So even if Jed himself is saying, I didn't do any of this. We have all the text messages from Wayfarer and emails showing that they thought that that's what Jed was doing. That's what they thought they were paying him for. So it doesn't really do any good if he says, I swear I didn't do it, because everybody else on your team, the guys paying your checks, like signing out the money, think that's what you're doing. And they obviously don't do that just because reasons. There is a compelling reason why they think that. Wallace's motion, I didn't do it, nobody saw it, you can't prove anything. Yes, that was it. You know, and then talking about flagging stuff to them to take serious action on the social side. If you're just monitoring, what's the serious action? If you're just monitoring. Baldoni saying the guy we bought wouldn't do this, right? About a Perez Hilton article confirms he's not doing analysis too. Yes. Again, if you only thought that they were doing analysis, Baldoni, I think like 2 or 3 times says, this is not us, right? We're not doing this. You wouldn't, that would not be the conversation you would have, because you would know. And especially given that like Nathan's response is, no, what we're doing is more sophisticated than bots. Like, then you're not monitoring. I don't know what part of it. So I'm glad they called this out, because I was like, there's no part of Wallace's I didn't do this that flies here, because all of Wayfarer thought he was doing something. So what are we doing here? And they post this out that, you know, they ignore all of this along with the rest of the men complaint in favor of a self-serving and unsupported narrative denying any wrongdoing, are joining of a conspiracy. And then did I miss the other piece where they said that basically, you know, he put in his, you know, sworn document, and it's like, no. So they're arguing that he's saying that he's not subject to personal jurisdiction in the court in New York. But they basically come back and say, well, look, you know, he doesn't deny that their conspiracy existed or that other members had sufficient contact in New York. Only the Wallace part is only to say that we didn't join in that. And the only piece they've got for that is a self-serving declaration from Wallace himself, right? Who asserts in a conclusory fashion that he did not join the conspiracy. I definitely didn't do it. But yeah, I mean, like they say, it's contradicted by the text messages. So I'd seen a lot of people in response to his motion to dismiss saying, well, you know, he put out this declaration under oath, couldn't possibly have done it. And it's like, that doesn't work. Otherwise, every single defendant in every case would just write one of those at the beginning, swearing they were never at the scene of the crime, they do not know the victim. You would never be able to progress a case if that held any weight at all. And it's very weird because, like I said, its whole motion to dismiss was based off that the allegations in the in the complaint were false, and you can't do that. Which is what they, you know, talk about here. At this stage, the amended complaint's more than plausible allegations trump his declaration, which the court cannot even consider at this stage without first allowing discovery into Wallace's participation in the conspiracy, discovery that will only confirm what Miss Lively was able to allege based on the text and emails. So they're saying, like, you can't take his declaration as true without discovery to find out whether he participated or not. So I think they also mentioned somewhere else that it's entered into evidence too early as well. So yeah, defendants never lie, says Marcy Jakes. Absolutely. And the joke farm says, well, if he's hired for something different, where's that contract? Yeah, I mean, we don't even know who hired him at this point, because, you know, TAG have backed out and said, we did say that we hired him, but now we didn't say that we hired him, and we don't know who hired him, and nobody knows who Jed Wallace is, was their official answers. So then they start getting into the arguments for Texas. And like I said, I had originally thought, like, okay, maybe it could apply. They basically call out here, where am I? What page? Timeline's been taken to true 14. Oh, I missed the, oh, we didn't get there yet. We didn't get to the timeline first. Okay. I didn't miss something. They argue that he was saying that he did business in California. Where is the piece that I'm looking for? Okay. 24. Oh, I'm skipping ahead. I'm skipping ahead. All right, we're going to jump to 14. We'll come back to that in a minute. I thought that's what we're going for. They give a timeline in here. So I talked about, when we talked about the Wallace stuff, there was some weirdness going on with when we filed the original CRD complaint, he was in it. When Wayfarer filed theirs, he wasn't, then he was, and what happened. And they kind of clear up what actually happened in here. So they talk about what originally happened was that on December 20th, Lively files her administrative complaint with a CRD, right? And that it named Wallace, which it did. I don't know if I have that up. Yeah, Blake Lively's CRD. Oh, I don't want to skip to that. We'll just, yeah. She'd named him originally in her CRD complaint. And on December 31st, the Wayfarer parties then countersued the New York Times, or sued the New York Times. And they had all of the parties, but not Wallace, when they sued Lively on January 16th. All right. So let me just bring these up because we're getting confused. So when Baldoni sued the New York Times, Jed was included. When he did his 179-page complaint in California, in New York, he's no longer on here. When he files his amended complaint against Lively, I think it's also not on here as well. Not on here. Okay. So then when Lively is filing, when she filed her CRD complaint, Jed Wallace was on. When she filed her original New York one, where is it? Do I still have it? Baldoni, Blake Lively, CRD. Oh, I don't have it here. Okay. When she filed her New York one, she didn't. And then when she filed the amended complaint, he was back on. So what she's saying happened is when Wayfarer sued, they did not include him when they were in the New York case, and then dismissed the California case that did include him. At the February 3rd initial conference in this matter, Brian Freeman, who'd represented Wallace in connection with the California lawsuit, explained that Wayfarer parties have filed in this court because it makes no sense doing it on different coasts and different coasts with different courts. Since many of the issues are going to be so similar, we're going to do one proceeding in front of the New York court. So they moved the venue because, look, it just makes better to consolidate it, even as they dropped Jed Wallace. The next day, Wallace then sued Lively in Texas, okay? Saying that he was going to sue them because he wasn't liable for the conduct that she had alleged in the CRD complaint, and that this was defamation. By saying that he had participated in all of this, it was defamation. Okay, so now we're up to speed. The reason this is important is because they're making this claim that Wallace is making this claim that his was filed first. So because his complaint was filed first, they should go with that venue. Now, Lively comes back and says, well, it wasn't filed first, because the filed first rule is about having cases that are substantially similar. They don't have to have the identical list of the parties on the claim. It's just which case in this whole thing is the similar one. And in this case, the CRD complaint is precisely the first one to file. And I think this is a fair, reasonable argument. I don't know if it's a correct application of the first to file rule, but in terms of the logic here, it's pretty sound. But then they also point out that the Texas action itself is a mirror image judgment of non-liability for the claims in the CRD. So Wallace wouldn't even have a defamation judgment that he's putting out there with not the claims in the CRD. So he's admitting that that was the first filed complaint and triggering it. And they also say that he actually uses language in it that it's an anticipatory declaratory judgment action. Again, legalese. So they're saying that that means that he's acknowledging that this was made under the threat of a presumed advisory filing, and so that they were trying to file that, to in response to the other one. I think that's pretty sound. I don't think that's wrong there. All right, so then they come to a bunch of arguments here about like the choice of venue, and making some more of the arguments about why it should be consolidated into New York rather than into Texas. You could drive a semi between the specifics of what he says he didn't do in that statement. Oh, I know. Like, it's so very precisely worded as well. So it's like, what are we doing here? So What did I want on choice of forum? I could have sworn there was something in here. Meanwhile, the person. So he's saying that it's first filed, but it's meritless. There was something in here. Oh, I think it's later. I think the choice of forum comes down later. All right, so they argue, look, the convenience of the witnesses. They're basically going to have to call a bunch of the same witnesses, and if we have it in, Texas and New York, and we just transfer just Wallace's piece to Texas, now you've got witnesses going to two different states to testify rather than having him in one court, one district. And so that makes sense then to consolidate it. The same here is the convenience of the parties, right? Because a bunch of the people that are in both of those cases would then have to travel, and that Wallace had said, well, look, I can't do this because I'm going to have to travel back and forth to New York, and it would be financially devastating. And they're saying, look, there's no reason he would travel to and from just one single trip to New York. It would not be in it undue hardship. There is a circumstance that's redacted. There's a big bunch of lines in it, because he talks about, like, it would impinge his ability to do business in Texas, because he'd be away from his office, that it would cost him. And there's also one that's redacted. And they talk about this here and saying, look, his special circumstances in the redacted piece, there's no need to consider those right now, except that if he is needed to go to trial, they can consider it then. So do wonder what that redacted is. I wonder if he's caretaker for somebody or something and cannot be out of the state for a period of time. We don't know, but they're basically saying, look, we can handle that when it comes to trial. We don't have to deal with that right now. And then the locus of operative facts. So here, Lively's saying that she's holding Wallace parties vicariously liable. This is something we're going to talk about here. He can't watch Reddit out of state, says Hopey Mom Kenobi. That's pretty funny. So they're saying that they hold him vicariously liable. This is something that's going to come up because it's something now that Wayfarer then turn around and use in their response to Blake Lively. Vicariously liable means that you can hold somebody else liable for their actions if they're doing it under your direction. So we've seen an example of this already with Jennifer Abel, who in her response to Blake Lively's complaint had basically said, look, I'm an employee of JonesWorks. I was doing everything at JonesWorks' direction. So if this case comes out and I did anything to harm Blake Lively, any damages would go to JonesWorks, and they'd have to pay for the damages I did because I did all of my work under their direction, right? This is vicarious liability. Jennifer Abel's not liable because she was directed and told to do this by JonesWorks. Another example, an agent, right? This is what they had tried to argue in the response to Ryan Reynolds, that they were doing so at the direction of Blake Lively. They were her agents. And so given that she was directing them and telling what to do, they are vicariously liable. And so Lively's here arguing that Jed Wallace is liable because, because Wayfarer employed Wallace, and Wallace was doing these things. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and that he was being directed to do this. He should have known it was wrong and should have chosen to do otherwise. So he, as their agent, is still liable for all of the work that's being done. So I don't know, but that's what they're arguing there anyway. They talk about the relative means and saying it wouldn't be that difficult for him to go to New York, I think once. And I think in his own claim, he talked about he'd gone to, New York by himself. Choice of law. They try to argue that, I think it's in here that the Wallace party had an argument that if personal jurisdiction and venue are proper in New York, then New York choice of law applies. They point out that no, choice of law basically means just because the venue's New York, it doesn't mean that you would be held to New York law. So you wouldn't be under that. Where? Okay. Applying that standard they made a complaint reveals a deeper problem with the Wallace's party argument. Their citation-free assertion, which was pretty clever, that no conduct is alleged to have taken place in California, but that is demonstrably false. So they were trying to say that California doesn't apply because obviously California has these much stricter rules. because he didn't do any conduct in California. He's not been there, you know, he lives in Texas. He'd never been, I think he said, like, you know, I've never been to New York, I've been there once. They then point out something which has been there from the start, but I guess we all missed. Street Relations was incorporated in California. Back in Blake's original CRD complaint, they call Street Relations a California company. What that means is if he's incorporated in California, his company is held by California law. So that's a problem. They also point out that in his own motion to dismiss, he talks about, you know, that he had been hired, directed to do his work in California, exclusive California, talking about he was giving feedback to Nathan in California. He considered the impact of his work to be in California. He was to talk to her team, who he knew were in California. He worked for Wayfarer Studios, which I knew to be based in California. In other words, I thought I was doing business and providing my service to individuals in California. So I thought this was pretty impressive too, that they're basically saying, look, he's arguing about what law should apply, but law isn't the same as venue. This is why the venue should be New York. And he's openly telling us and agreeing with Blake Lively that the law that should apply is California. Yeah, California has no jurisdiction over my California LLC is a brilliant argument that does not work. So like coming back through this, I originally thought like, oh, that was pretty good. Now I'm seeing that like, actually, I don't think Jed Wallace's motion to dismiss was as smart as I thought it was originally. The other piece that he goes on to talk about is this, that he can only be held accountable under California's employment law for, you know, retaliating against harassment if he knew about the law. So that, you know, the law is that, you know, you're liable if you aid and abet somebody from retaliating. And he's basically saying, well, I didn't know anything about that law. And you saw here, it says it makes it unlawful for any person to aid, abet, incite, compel, or coerce the doing of any acts forbidden under the act or attempt to do so. They basically say, well, you know, Lively's not alleged how Wallace or Street knew that the FA existed, that law existed, let alone know that anyone's conduct violated it. They point out the rather kind of obvious argument that you don't have to subjectively know the law, much less hold a correct interpretation of it. That law is not saying that you need to know, in terms of know that a violation occurred. You don't have to know that X, Y, or Z violated that law. They're saying you only need to know the act occurred. And they call in that here and say that all that's necessary is the defendant subjectively knows of facts that properly constitute a violation. They don't have to know that it is a violation. And they point out how absurd that law would be, that if a defendant could not be held liable on aiding and abetting with theory without an allegation that he or she had arrived at or obtained a legal opinion about their collaborator's conduct. So, you know, that you could not be held liable unless like you'd studied law. Like that does not seem correct. And they call it out here and say the law does not require that the Wallace parties knew that FEHA existed, Googled it, fired up Westlaw, or asked ChatGPT whether it was lawful to retaliate against someone for speaking up about harassment at work, which lends, you know, credence to the fact that maybe Wayfarer were using ChatGPT for their work. And I think we got the ChatGPT Dash in here, so maybe Jed Wallace is maybe Lively's team is using it. It says in order to be liable for aiding and abetting, right? So they're saying, look, he only had to know that he was being asked to retaliate for somebody speaking up about harassment at work. He didn't need to know that that act in itself violated the law. And they talk about he absolutely knew it because the whole point of retaining Wallace was that they could help parties, the Wayfarer parties, shift the narrative from HR complaints on set to shining a spotlight on Lively and destroy her reputation, which is throughout the scenario planning document and the documents where they're talking back and forth with Wallace about what they need to change. It's on the updates that they put up where they said there was no pickup of the other articles. There's nobody talking about the HR complaints. And that, you know, they're pushing the spotlight onto Lively and Ryan Reynolds instead. So like, Junk Farm, hey man, I just drove the getaway car. How do I know it's supposed to know the bank robbery was a crime? Right, like I just saw flashing lights. I didn't know that what I was doing was a crime. Nobi Kenobi says, I did everything in California, but I shouldn't be responsible for what I did in California. Yeah, that seems to be his argument, was that everything he was doing was California. He believed the impact was in California, and he was working for a California incorporated company, but his chair was in Texas, so can he really be held liable in California? Compelling legal argument. So, I mean, they're making the point here that he knew that they were retaliating and they knew the reason for it. And then, she talked about, the other ones. And they bring up the other case of the social media account that was making these allegations about Baldoni. Now, I don't think the other account was as credible. I shouldn't say was credible because I have no idea, because we didn't see that account. We don't know what the allegations were made. But they talk about even that account they directed to Wallace to ask him to take serious actions. So even there, somebody else is complaining about misconduct. It doesn't necessarily have to be in California, and they direct it to Wallace, making a pattern of behavior where anybody who was making complaints about Baldoni, they were directing Wallace to take action. So therefore, it should well be interpreted that that was his role, and doing so in California constitutes a violation. So yeah. I thought that was pretty good argument against it. They then come on about his, intentional emotional distress, and he's saying that, look, they haven't alleged anything that could actually raise to the possibility of intentional emotional distress. What did I have? Sorry, one moment. Page 28. So they kind of point out that, look, like the social media plan and everything was about soliciting, developing, and implementing a multi-tiered digital plan. They weaponized the digital army. They were seeding and promoting stuff on social media. They had tried to argue, I think it's on the next page, that, what they were doing was that they were just feeding a counter narrative. What do I see? Oh, it's at the bottom. Their primary argument is that it was hard to imagine how a public relations counterpoint could be recognizable as an intentional emotional distress claim. But they point out that that's not really what you were doing. You were going above and beyond by seeding content, boosting content, pushing it. This was not normal PR work that they were doing. You knew that what you were doing would create a false impression about Lively and active reckless disregard for the truth. Therefore, you knew what you were doing would cause a negative news cycle, social media algorithms, online vitriol, violence, all the rest of the stuff. And that has been plain to see, again, like I talked about, from anyone who's in this space. So for them to say, well, how will we know? Like, you were intentionally feeding it and created this knowing what that was your end goal. So yeah, they finish it out just basically saying, that's what they talked about is, they know that they were part of an astroturfing campaign, and it definitely meets the definitions of being outrageous conduct. I think this is pretty solid. I don't think Jed Wallace is getting this dismissed. I'm not sure he's getting it moved to Texas. We'll see. Again, not a liar. I could be wrong. All right. Let's see what we got. The man with no name, but also two first names, Jed Wallace. Okay, so now we're going to finally the Wayfarer response to Blake Lively. And I talked about the Ryan Reynolds one was kind of rough. This gets worse. First off, notice that this one is much drier. There's not much of the bombastic, over-the-top language in this one that there has been present throughout all of Wayfarer's stuff. Now, Blake Lively's motion to dismiss was right at that limit of 35 pages and hit it in. Wayfarer's is as well, and I wonder if part of like the shit talking essentially that has been cut out of here is because they had so much to get through to try and make their argument that there's no quote, there's no Lively thought she was not going to get away with being able to take over this movie, and we're coming for her now because Baldoni Batman will bring justice to Gotham. They don't really kind of go in for it. They immediately start out with like, nope, that Lively refuses to accept responsibility, and that she's asking for punitive damages. And if you remember, because I think it was like, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, Lively's claim was basically that there is a California Civil Code, section 447.1, that basically provides this blanket protection, not only for making sexual harassment complaints, but for any kind of retaliation or making defamation claims against in response, that specifically targets what Wayfarer is doing and would give her triple damages as a punitive measure to stop people from filing these retaliatory lawsuits. Now, what it does is it protects anything that you do where you're making sexual harassment allegations and stuff around it. So they kind of argue that, well, no, that's not true. She doesn't get this protection from it. They argue that there's, you know, to do that, to make that claim, that you would already have to state that she acted alone without malice and that she had a reasonable basis for her claims. In other words, to make findings of fact apparent on the face of the pleadings, which finds the fact plays in the face of well-established rules governing motions brought under it. Now, I don't think this is true. So here's to say this, because, you know, for him, they have to kind of prove that, you know, she was doing this and this was false and all the rest of the stuff, but their own text messages prove that they thought she was in the right, that she's feeling like she's justified. They've already admitted that, like, there's not really malice here. There might be in their feeling malice and they might be upset about it, but this California code is all about protecting people who make honest, good faith sexual harassment allegations and protect them and those allegations, even if those allegations don't turn out to be true. So all of Baldoni's work to say, well, we're going to recontextualize this incident. This isn't really what happened. This isn't what mattered. It does not matter. It doesn't matter if you think that Blake Lively is over-exaggerating and misunderstanding or misinterpreting these actions. If she genuinely believes that they're sexual harassment and takes steps to report those or communicate those, she is protected. I think that law is far broader. Now, I don't know if it'll work in terms of the motion to dismiss and get rid of things, but I do think it is much broader enough as a broader protection than what he's trying to claim here, that she has to prove all of these things. And you can't do that because, you know, in order to do that, you would have to assume that the complaint is false. I don't think you have to go to that level. But they're basically saying, look, we're totally definitely got a good solid argument here, and there's no way that is what you're going to do. When the court assumes the truth of the facts set forth in the FAC, so if you assume good faith that the FAC is made correctly and its pleadings are truthful, as it must in ruling on this motion, the only possible result is a denial of the motion in full. But if you don't agree with us, then any technical defects or inartful pleading can be readily cured by amendment. So again, right, they're basically making this argument that, like, we totally believe that that's the case, but if it's not, then let us cure it by amendment. They don't have faith in their own arguments, and they're openly telling you that, yeah, they accept that we need more. Again, they argue they're freely allowed, which is not the case. And they also add on to say Wayfarer parties are, again, in the same as the Ray and Reynolds, adding further facts to plead in support of their claims against Lively, which again brings up the argument, if you have every day more further facts, more pleading, more evidence, more claims against all of these parties, why have you not filed your amended complaint? Why are you not filing a motion to amend it? Why are you dragging this out for another 2 weeks, 3 weeks? While you're doing this? And again, the only possible answer I could know is they want to see all of the legal arguments. So tired of reading that line in its variations. Cured by amendment, leave to amend. I can't remember what the third variation is, but yes. Granted by amendment, I think, as well as like the third party. Furthermore, Wayfarer can amend their complaint to fully incorporate the allegations of Exhibit A into the body of the complaint, mooting the motion to strike. So this is the argument that the timeline, right, is invalid. It's improper pleading. They shouldn't be putting that in there. They're saying, look, okay, even if we're going to do it, we're just going to put that into the body of the complaint. If you are wanting the judge to be on your side, right, and grant you leniency so that you can amend your complaint, sticking your middle finger up him is not the way to do this, right? This is a big F you if you're going to say, hey, even if the judge tells us and strikes down our exhibit, we're just going to roll the exhibit into the body of our complaint. Not great, right? There's a ton of stuff in that timeline that is irrelevant, not pursuant to their claims, should not be in there. They need to incorporate pieces in there, but the harmful part to them is, even when you look at their timeline, everything in their timeline backs up Blake Lively's narrative. There's nothing in there that shows any threats from Blake Lively, you know, any of the kind of extortive claims that they're making. There's not a single text message that says you need to do this. The only stuff they have is stuff from their own side where they're like, oh, you know, she's forcing us to give them a PGA strike, PGA mark. And you're like, well, where is the threat that says give her the PGA mark or we're going to the New York Times with this harassment allegation. They haven't shown a single piece of that. So, yeah. Uh, it's a stealth plot to drive the judge insane, or all of us keep doing this because it's rough. I think Baldoni wanted all of Blake and she brushed him off. I don't think he wanted her in that way. I don't think he wanted her in a romantic way. I think it's very obvious that Wayfarer caught a big fish in Blake Lively and getting her to do the movie. I think, the text messages from Baldoni to Ryan Reynolds, it seemed very clear he wanted to build a personal friendship with him. I think, we look at that relationship he has with Hugh Jackman that we talked about at the beginning. I really think Baldoni was hoping that this would lead to that, right? And it would elevate his star by seeing around these big celebrities. And, these are also two people who, I get people who don't, are on Baldoni's side won't agree, but genuinely have a reputation for being decent, nice people and friendly and good to their friends. So like you would think like this is a good circle to be in. I'm going to be well connected. I'm going to be looked after. I'm going to have the dragons protecting me. Like she talked about, like, that they protect her and her friends. I think he was really excited about like the good things that were going to come from this. And I think her coming onto the set, having experience of professional production, seeing that it was a shit show, everything fell apart, and he couldn't take the criticism well. The one thing, right, that we talk about like in this space that I do, like in talking about anti-misogyny and being like an ally and part of understanding your privilege, is taking criticism well, knowing that you're going to screw up, people are going to call you out, and you need to be able to fully examine that criticism to say, how much of this is valid? Where am I screwing up? Or just going, okay, I'm grateful for the criticism. I don't feel it's appropriate, or moving on. Not having this overly unregulated emotional reaction to where you blow your top and are dismissive and you're like, well, I guess I missed the HR meeting. Like, no. And I think that's really what happened is they were just not ready for a professional. They did not have a professional standard of production. And they got caught up in that. That's what I think. I don't necessarily think any of them were, overly attracted to each other or romantically attracted or sexually attracted, and that's what caused that. I just think he just hasn't done the work, and they were very it was very much a boys' club, So yeah, they carry on here, but this is the bit that got me. So they talk about, look, you can't do these sanctions, the triple penalties and all the rest of the stuff, because there's the Noah Pennington doctrine, which precludes the imposition of liability for the exercise of rights by the petition clause of the First Amendment. All right, so again, we're going to dig into a little bit of legal. And again, you can see like I'm learning some of this stuff because normally I would gloss over this, but we're digging into this because again, this was something that I was like, this doesn't seem right. And so they're arguing that, look, the First Amendment, you're allowed to speak your piece and go source, and they're saying you should be able to have a right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Fine, okay, that's fine, right? The Constitution safeguards Americans' right to have the government take action such as bringing legal claims. Totally fine. And they say that the Noah Pennington doctrine bars courts from punishing litigants for bringing good faith claims, right? Including the imposition of harsh penalties like triple damages award here that Lively's seeing. So firstly, they're trying to argue, look, our defamation claims, our retaliatory defamation claims are valid, so the Noah Pennington doctrine bars California's law from putting those penalties onto us because we're bringing this claim in good faith. And I think the California Civil Code just says any retaliatory defamation claims in terms of sexual harassment are barred, even if they're in good faith. So they're trying to say, look, that contradicts this Pennington doctrine. There's a huge problem with this. Okay, you're gonna have to follow me here a little bit, but the big piece to understand here is that this is specifically around antitrust laws or competitiveness, their business laws. And the whole point of this doctrine talks here is that they're tailored for the business world and not appropriate for the political arena. So there may be some pieces of this law that, because they want to create these anti-competitive laws, that they may have an impact elsewhere on other impacts of law, but we don't want to restrict that ability to break up uncompetitive businesses and monopolies because they're valid but we have this conflict. How do we resolve it? I'm cautious enough not to expect Blake Lively to get 3 times compensation, but I actually still really wanted to get that. I do too. I don't know if she will. I don't think it's that strong, but we'll say I don't know law, right? But the point of this is that basically, if you present and do, your right to petition the government, you shouldn't then be injured, even if you're encouraging the government to work in that would open you to antitrust liability. So even if you're petitioning the government basically to create less competitiveness and a less competitive market and more monopolies, that shouldn't then open you for liability for doing that, is basically what this is. And it talks in here as well. There was a railroad company, they campaigned for legislation intended to ruin the trucking industry. Normally they would be liable for, anti-competitiveness, trying to, further themselves. But they argued that no, they're immune because, it's meant to protect their ability to petition the government and do it and not open them up to this. But the point is, it's specifically about antitrust laws. It talks in here. Where is it? A petition may be. Oh, they're talking about the limited scope. We don't need that bit. But yeah. So basically, the whole point of this is, this is specifically around antitrust laws. So you petitioning the government, causing a less competitive environment, or encouraging the government to create less competition, shouldn't then open you to antitrust litigation because you've been doing that. This has nothing to do with defamation or California employment law or what. I don't know why they're bringing this up, and they bring it up a ton of times in here. It is completely inappropriate, does not cover them in the way they are. I have not seen yet any of the Baldoni side response to this. I want to see if anybody's picked up on this Noah Pennington doctrine and is trying to wave this around as some magic I win or shield for them, because it doesn't protect them at all. Now, again, not a lawyer. Maybe there's some broader context here that I'm missing, or maybe there's some other ruling around this where it does kind of broaden this to be a First Amendment thing. But from what I could see, this was just about antitrust laws. Anyway. The chat GPT allegations is sounding more legit. There's definitely a degradation in quality of the motions that we're seeing from Wayfarer, right? They've always been bombastic, but I haven't seen this many legal issues in them. And I don't know if it's just they're getting sloppy. I don't know if it's just I'm taking more time to be more cautious and actually check some of these things because I don't trust them, or if it's just they're getting the pressure of having to churn out all these motions to dismiss, and like you say, they're throwing stuff out, and maybe they are doing a little chat GPT that's like, oh, Noah Pennington doctrine, and doesn't apply here, bro. I want Legal Eagle to cover all of this again. Yeah, I mean, my disappointment with Legal Eagle was he covered everything from an overview and a summary of what it was. I didn't really see a lot of in-depth this is what I feel in the law and interpretation and analysis, and that's what I would really like to see from him, because I think anybody can kind of talk about what's going on and what's going on in the movements and maybe what's next. But knowing stuff like digging into a document like this, the Noah Pennington document. Does it apply? Does it not? One of the cases they use, is this a strong argument? Is it weak? Those are the type of stuff I would love to see, somebody like that coming out with, or, I guess we just wait for, more with MJ to post to TikTok and we can get some of that. I think it's pretty weak to quote the First Amendment as a defense for frivolous lawsuits. Well, they're trying to argue that the First Amendment protects the right to petition the government. They're not arguing that the First Amendment protects them here. They're saying that, look, the First Amendment gives you the right to petition the government, and then the Noah Pennington doctrine allows you not to be punished for bringing good faith claims. But that's not true, because again, that would apply to all law and everything, and I don't know when penalties like that. And again, if that existed before the California Civil Code, which I think it has to, right? I didn't look at when this particular case was 1972. Yeah, okay. So knowing that Noah Pennington doctrine was already there, and that this kind of came afterwards, they would have written that with knowing that that was the precedent understanding. If Wayfarer's understanding is correct, they'd know that they couldn't put that in there. I don't know, but I think the issue is that this is fairly new and recent, so it may not have been fully like tested, tried, and kicked around. So there may be some good objections like this to it that we've not yet seen. I don't know. Any legal channels covering the without the Baldoni worship? More with MJ is she's doing a lot of good work on that. Oh God, I can't remember the other really good lawyer over on Threads as well. So I apologize. I'll try and look while we're doing this and see, because I can't remember who that is. But there's a couple. There's only a couple though that I'm like I like, and I think are doing a good job of providing that legal analysis without getting too in the weeds. Though if you've been on Threads this week, you'll know that I got into I got into a little bit because I called out a lawyer because I was like, I don't think they're doing great. But anyway, so the other piece that they make then, after having kind of gone for this wild Hail Mary with the Noah Pennington, is they're trying to argue now that, okay, look, we don't, Blake Lively had pointed out that, look, Lively didn't actually make any specific defamatory statements. And they say, well, that doesn't matter because Lively's the principal for her agents. So they're trying to argue in the same as this vicarious liability that because Sloan and Reynolds are acting on her behalf, she's liable for any defamatory statements that they have made on her behalf. So they go under the principles of agency and the doctrine of respondeat superior. Again, I'm not sure these things apply. Where are we? Oh, I missed a piece. No, yeah, we got that with the amendment and then further facts. We got that. She's liable by her agents. We got that. Page 14, the actual smear is orchestrated. Okay. So they're arguing that, the smear campaign was orchestrated by Sloan, but at Lively's direction. Again, we haven't seen anything that says this. They're trying to argue that as her publicist, they were out there doing work on behalf of Lively with her understanding and her authority to speak on her behalf. And they're saying that they did the smear campaign. We haven't seen any evidence of a smear campaign. We haven't seen any evidence of Lively directing Sloan to do anything. The only thing I think we'd seen is on Lively's side where she sent a text message basically saying, don't do anything. Don't say anything. Don't do anything. Keep it quiet. We haven't seen anything from Wayfarer kind of proving that this happened. They really don't want this to apply to Nathan and Abel planning stories for Baldoni. Oh, you're reading ahead. You're reading my notes ahead. But yes, so they're applying that because they were making these defamatory statements on behalf of Lively, that they are there. And they make these two arguments. That first, they have an agency relationship. So Sloan is her agent because, as a publicist, she's making these statements to the press. She's doing all this stuff on her behalf. That seems fair. I don't know that it connects all the way to all of this. They then argue that Reynolds too was in an agency relationship with Lively, representing in her dealings. This is where this falls apart. That is not the relationship between the two of them. That will not hold up. They talk about Sloan and Reynolds acted as Lively's henchmen in carrying out the scheme. And then they go, okay, so under the principle of agency, Lively is liable for defamation by Sloan and Reynolds. I think you have to show that they were working on their behalf and that they were saying these things with their knowledge and stuff. So, for instance, things like Reynolds saying that, Baldoni is a sexual predator, I think they have to show that Lively knew or was aware that he was doing that on her behalf. And they haven't shown that. And again, they're going to have trouble showing communications between the two of them because of the privileged nature of that. So I don't know how you get there from there. But the other piece is then they then go further and say, well, there's this other doctrine, respondeat superior, in which an employer is held liable for defamatory statements made by its employees. So very similar to the other vicarious liability from before, where the actions of an employer might be liable. Now they're saying defamatory statements made by employees. They then said that Sloan is Lively is Sloan's employer, which is a gross misrepresentation of their agreement and what their arrangement was. As a publicist, Lively is not employing her publicist. She might be paying for them, but she's not employing them. She's engaging them in a contract, and there'll be limits and reasons around that. Employee has a very different meaning, and they talk about that. And if this is the case, this is what we were just talking about. Who was it? Who was the said it in chat? Come on, help me. Gavel Gavel on podcasts. Yes, okay, thank you, Vander V. Yes, Gavel Gavel is also good. I have not yet watched, but I've been told very good things about them. Ugh, I've forgotten now. I can't really see. There we go, Junk Farm. It was you, Junk Farm. They don't want this applying to Nathan enable planning stories for Baldoni. That's what I was going to talk about. So if they do and are successful in this argument, the huge problem that Wayfarer has now is everybody on the Wayfarer side becomes bound by these same rules, right? Because if Sloan is an employee of Lively because she's paying her, Jones is an agent of Baldoni's, Jones is an employee of Baldoni's, Abel is an employee and agent. So all of the stuff that they were doing all comes under Wayfarer. Wayfarer now have complete liability, and Baldoni himself and Heath and Sarowitz, for everything that everybody else has done. So they don't get to say, oh, we didn't have knowledge or all of this stuff. If they're going to put this out here and try to make this argument, they've just opened themselves up to a world of liability for all of the stuff. And this is problematic because in Baldoni's own complaint, right? His own complaint, August the 8th, I think it's more closer to August 9th, but we'll scroll. They talk about that they claim that Jones had planted this negative story against Blake Lively, right? That they'd gone out there to defame her. They knew that it was false. They knew it was to damage her reputation, and they planted it with the Daily Mail, right? So meets all of the criteria for defamation. They accept that this happens. They accept that it was done. The discussion is about, was it Jones? Was it Stephanie Jones that did it, right? This is what Wayfarer themselves claim. Or as Jones claims, was it Abel and Nathan? As far as Blake Lively is concerned, it doesn't matter who she throws under the bus for this, right? Jones or Abel or Nathan. The point is, as an agent of Wayfarer and Baldoni and representing them and speaking on his behalf, he's now liable because he's their quote-unquote employer. And that's the argument they're trying to make. This is disastrous. I don't know why you would openly try to make this, because it's so easy to Uno reverse if they're successful in it, because the next thing to do is go, cool, now you're liable for everything. Don't know why they would make this. And like I said, the employee part is definitely not going to work. They then, is it this piece where they then say about Ryan Reynolds as well? No, they just say, even though it wasn't actually an employee, it was styled like one. I'm trying to find that actual piece of the quote. Given the degree of control. I'll have to look for it. Oh, it's in the footnote. That's what I missed. So yeah, they argue in the footnote that given the degree of control Lively is alleged to have exercised over Sloan, they clearly stand in an employee relationship, regardless of how the engagement was styled. No. No, that doesn't work. And I don't know the case law here to cite it, so maybe I'm completely wrong. But again, they're talking about, specific different types of employment. Like you see here, contract hire, apprenticeship, oral run. These are very clearly talking about employer-employee relationships. They're not talking about you hired a publicist or an agent to act on your behalf and they somehow become your employee because you paid them. If that was the case, there's a whole bunch of employment law that's problematic. That I do have some familiarity with from being a people manager, because of the distinction we have to make between full-time employees and contract hires, and how you have to be very careful about the language you use, right? You don't get to call them employees, and you shouldn't. And if you do, it opens up a ton of liability. And it's also like the way you treat those employees has to be different. And there's very strict boundaries about it, because the moment that you start treating them like an employee, they get all kinds of liabilities and protections that are not available to contract employees. So there's a ton here that, like, you don't just get to label somebody an employee because you think that they got paid. Doesn't work like that. Doesn't work on a legal principle at all. So yeah. Okay. 16. What did I say about this? Oh, okay. So they're again kind of trying to allege that everybody's involved in all of this and everybody made all of these defamatory statements. They're talking again about, well, look, Sloan made these defamatory statements, so Lively's responsible. And again, they make this claim that Sloan made statements to third parties, including without limitation to the New York Times and other outlets, that Baldoni is a sexual predator who sexually assaulted Lively. And they go again to, point to their FAC to talk about it. But we know, right? And the frustration here is that isn't the case. We've talked about this before, where, the conversation between James Vitsuka and, oh God, I can't even read this. The First Amendment complaint is mess. I guess it's you'd have to look at it in the original. But we've covered this a couple of times. The conversation with James Vitsuka, where he says here in December that like she'd never said anything about sexual harassment or sexual allegations, and where he says here she's now saying that Blake was sexually assaulted is after the CRD complaint. This is in reference to the CRD complaint. It is not, as Baldoni's attempting to claim here, her talking to the Daily Mail beforehand to call him a sexual predator. She never uses the language. So like, where is the evidence that that ever happened? Again, they're trying to use the conversation that happened in December, after December 20th, after the CRD complaint, to say that she was planting stories beforehand. I don't know why. I think, well, Sloan did call it out that he was misrepresenting this. I don't know if Lively will when she comes back and does her response. The potato quality screenshots are back. It's what's wild to me is how they get worse, because this is the amended complaint and it has potato quality. But if you go back to his first complaint, is it this one? No, that's the 179. This one's the original one. If you go to this one, the screenshots are much better. I think it's like 60, 61, 62. So we can just go see that screenshot. I think a little better. No. 64, 63, 62, 61. No, I forget where it is then. But yeah, this is the one where he, is saying she didn't say anything. Why is she saying it now? And it was like, yep. Yeah, no, here it is. Yeah, these are they're much better in this one. Where he's showing the screenshots. This is the stuff on the left-hand side that was said August the 7th. The stuff on the right-hand side is what was said. You can see he's on a call here, talking to Nathan and Friedman afterwards in December, saying that, she never said anything about it. She says here, never once did she mention anything about sexual harassment. Like when he's talking to Melissa and Friedman, where they're coming out and saying, hey, do you have anything where she said anything about this? He literally starts off by saying she never said anything about sexual harassment. Yeah, he's in his response gear again, arguing that she did. Is wild. I don't know how this gets called out and stopped, and that he's deliberately making these false statements in the complaint and able to get away with it is wild to me. They then kind of make the point that by not correcting those defamatory comments made by Sloan and Reynolds, that she was ratifying them because she didn't correct them and go through them and change them. I think again this is a bad argument to make because it opens Wayfarer to the same liability, right? Brian Friedman has been in the news constantly, calling Blake Lively a liar, that she made up these false allegations, that she's this, she's that, she's trying to salvage her reputation, that we never did any of these stuff. This again makes them all liable for the same thing. Now, in their answers to Blake Lively, they talked about how they're invoking client attorney privilege because they don't want to say what they had directed him to say. But again, and I'm not a liar, right? But from reading, I'm not sure it protects them because Brian Friedman's making those statements outside of the courtroom. He's making them to the press. Those absolutely can be held as defamatory comments And if they want to invoke all of this saying, well, all of the agents are therefore responsible for the defamatory comments of their agent, then yeah, opens them up to it. So it's not just Brian Friedman who's then making defamatory comments about Blake Lively, it's everyone who's claiming to be represented by him. So like, oof. Yeah. Hello, God. It's me, Sarah. It says decimation to thee, but not to me. I like that better, decimation than defamation. Nobody will ever know this is a text about a Zoom call. Just throw it in and blur it with more red arrows. Yeah, and I think it's just they really didn't think anybody would go deep into this stuff and look at this stuff. Things like the edited and doctored text messages while they're talking about, well, Blake Lively's doctoring text messages. Well, so are you, bro. They didn't expect anybody to really call them out and take details. And they're right for the most part, because there's very few people talking about it. So, I mean, fair play to them. They know good PR. So yeah, she talked about they made statements, that she knew them, she knew they contained falsehoods, and that, you know, she didn't immediately terminate the agency relationships to clarify the statements, double down and certify and making them her own. Again, though, all of this applies to Baldoni, who, you know, while they're saying that Jones made this, well, you didn't immediately terminate Jones, and you didn't distance yourself from the comments she's made, so you're open to the same liability right here, that you have admitted in your own documents you were defaming Blake Lively. So I don't... Junk Farm says, I don't know how Friedman doesn't lose attorney-client when his emails are part of the conspiracy. He might. I think a bunch of lawyers have talked about, there looks like there may be, as more evidence comes in, a motion to get him taken off as counsel because he's a witness and a party to all of this. I think it's going to come to how much of that evidence shows up in discovery to see how big his role is in helping them with all of this. But the fact that he's connected to Jed Wallace and Jed was trying to connect Friedman to them suggests it probably is going to be there, and it probably is going to cause him some problems. But it also could be that's why he's not trying to really efficiently litigate this, is because he knows that that's coming at some point, and essentially the whole deck is going to get shuffled around. So don't know what the plan is. Seems wild. All right. They do claim then that, well, actually Lively did make statements herself. They say that the FAC alleges that Lively told the New York Times that she orchestrated a smear campaign. And they're essentially basically trying to say, look, Lively's protection against the CRD being protected, it's litigated, it's also under the California Civil Code, doesn't count because Lively made other defamatory comments that weren't in the CRD to the New York Times. And they talking specifically about here, Lively also falsely claimed to the New York Times that the Wayfarer parties agreed to the 17-point letter was proof that the sexual harassment was endemic on the film set. And they use this quote, but it's from their own FAC, which if we look at 217, isn't a quote from the New York Times or from Blake Lively. It's got nothing to do with it. And it says, when she buffaloed the Wayfarer parties to green, she sealed the perfect poison pill narrative, allowing her to later claim that their agreement was proof positive that sexual harassment was endemic on the set. That's not there. It's also not in the New York Times article. So, they're saying she gave a statement saying this to the New York Times. It's not here. It says, by the spring, Lively told people should work with the men's behavior had approved with the new protections. This is the only mention of the protections in the New York Times original article. And I can just show you, look, it's not mentioned protections anywhere else. So again, they're like quoting their own FAC as though it was Lively falsely claimed to the New York Times that blah, blah, blah. That's not a quote of Lively or the New York Times. That is a quote of their own FAC that they don't have any citation or quote for of her saying this. Like, this is bad. It's objectively bad. I don't know what the point of that is, because they're not showing any evidence of this. But anyway, they're trying to use this to basically get around the protections of the civil California civil law. Freeman also says the defamation originated 7-point document from November. Statute is up. I think this is good timing, Massey James, because we were coming right to this. So Lively claims that yes, because the 17-point protections is where the original pieces come from, that it's outside the statute of limitations. They say no, 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 no. We're claiming the earliest statements of those of Reynolds in July 2024, but they've just the second, right, said, well, you know, the 17-point letter was proof that the sexual harassment was endemic on set. So they're talking and tying the sexual harassment to the 17-point letter, but then saying no, it's got nothing to do with it. It's a wild circular list. Okay, so they're saying no, no, no. We're saying the earliest statements were Reynolds when he made the sexual predator in July. Cool. What else was there? They don't have anything else, right? So they say, okay, Lively's claiming it comes from Wayfarer in November. That's wrong. Although certain of the parties implicate the 17-point list in Lively's conduct, the defamation arrives from July and December. So her talking to the New York Times specifically. But this fabrications of okay, fabrications. So this was slightly before this. They talk about, look, they know that all of this was fabricated by Lively. So this is why, you know, the sexual harassment complaints aren't legit. But as we've covered, they've agreed to every event. Every event that she brought up as sexual harassment. They didn't say it didn't happen. They said it did. She's just misinterpreting it. So they haven't shown that these were fabricated. Fabricated would mean that they're not true. They've only shown that they disagree on the interpretation, which is what Blake Lively had pointed out in her motion to dismiss, I believe. They also go on to say that, look, she doesn't have protection from the litigation privilege of reporting this to the New York Times because while they are protected in talking about litigation, communicating with the public or the press is not when it advances the litigation by rallying the masses. And somebody should call Brian Friedman up right now and let him know that this is opening him up to huge amounts of liability because he has done this throughout December, January, February, and March. So if they're going to make the argument that Lively was litigating this in the press by talking to the New York Times, and that's what's going on here, then Brian Friedman is way over in terms of liability and coverage for this because, again, they can just turn around and use this argument right back at Wayfarer, and the exposure on their side is far more massive than statements to the New York Times that they cannot even point to at this point. They also go on where litigation is seriously considered. And they say that, look, the other issue is that Lively was doing this beforehand. So they say, look, there's certain pre-litigation activity that is covered by the litigation activity, sort of, you know, maybe her working with the New York Times ahead of releasing the CRD, putting it out there. But it's only applies when the litigation is seriously considered. Back when Lively launched her CRD complaint, Wayfarer's big argument was, she's doing this as a publicity stunt. She's not going to litigate this. She has no intention of going through the courts. This is all bullshit. And like, I think it was either the same day or the day after she filed the complaint again in New York on December 31st. They're now coming back to that argument. They're saying, look, she's not protected by pre-litigation activity because she never was going to really bring this litigation. And they say this seriously while they are neck deep in litigation. They're saying she never was going to litigate this with a straight face. So they point out, they said, well, Lively is likely to point out her now pending lawsuit in response. The Wayfarer parties allege and maintain that Lively never intended to file a lawsuit which would have triggered the Wayfarer's right to discovery. Lively did not ask the CRD to investigate Wayfarer. She requested a right to sue. So rather than getting an investigation, she requested a right to sue, which means she wasn't going to sue. And then they say she did not sue for weeks. As alleged in the FAC, Lively's pre-litigation communications, therefore, did not relate to litigation that was contemplated in good faith. This is bad. So Lively filed her CRD complaint on December the 20th, right? The federal courts are not open on weekends, right? So December 20th to December 31st, when it was filed in the District of New York, is It's 11 days, right? So it's not weeks. It's 11 days. Not only that, they're not open on weekends. They were closed on Christmas Eve and Christmas. So 2 days on the Tuesday and the Wednesday. So essentially, there were 4 working business days since she filed, the 23rd, the 26th, the 27th, the 30th, and then the 31st. 4 working days for her to file, and they're claiming she didn't sue for weeks. It was 4 working days. And they're trying to say that this meant that she wasn't trying to actually file. She filed in 4 working days. I want to say that again, 4 working days. And they're saying, well, you know, clearly she wasn't serious about filing litigation. Wild argument to make. They're not used to lawyers not using AI and actually out the legal documents. This is bad. Like, and this is what I'm saying. I haven't seen this before. I mean, I know I'm pretty pro Blake, right? And on this, and I've been pretty bad about going through the stuff. I haven't seen it be this bad in the stuff. This really does feel like a level below what we've seen from them. She filed the CRD for funsies according to them. Right. Like, how do you say that while you're neck deep in litigation? You're like, she was never going to sue us. She sued you the same day you sued her. Like, and this is the other thing is, it's one thing for them to say, look, we filed with New York and then she filed afterwards, right? Because now she realizes it's serious. We, you know, she filed the CRD complaint, didn't think that it was real. We weren't going to counter sue or sue the New York Times. So she never thought there was going to be a threat. And then when we did sue the New York Times, oh, then she sued us, right? There's an argument that could be maybe made like that. They put forward theirs on the same day, so she had no forewarning that they were going to post their stuff. So how do you make this argument? Like, it's wild. It was the 31st. I don't know. I don't know why they think that's going to be successful. And I can't see the judge taking that seriously when, like, again, the court was open for 4 days since they filed. And they didn't sue her until 2 weeks after she did, right? So doesn't that also work again, the same argument against them? I mean, like, they waited weeks to sue the New York Times, and then they waited, what, like another week? Or was it 2 days? I think it was like January the 1st. Maybe it was January the 1st. Let's see, does it have it in here? It was a little further up here, right? 179. This was 16th. So, I mean, you're looking at what, another 2 weeks, another 2.5 weeks until they sued her in return. So yeah, it's a good point, all scientists, that the same argument can be come back to them. So yeah, I mean, it's just very, very poorly argumented, this whole thing. They argue that the sexual harassment privilege doesn't apply because she was making these falsely and with malice and without a reasonable basis in fact. But as we already covered, like, they accept all of the events actually happened. So I don't get this. They do actually reveal, though, that, you know, she was given a producer credit, an executive producer title. They didn't want to give her the rest of the stuff. And they do actually kind of point out that, like, she was able to have some control over the movie. And I forget where this was. I can't remember. Was it production? There's a part where they admit in her contract that she did actually have some control over production and marketing. And I can't remember where that was in here. See if I can find it. No, I can't find it. Oh well. But yeah, so I thought that was interesting that this is the first time they kind of admitted that, yeah, actually she did have some power over the marketing and approval process over it. Is it approval? Come on, let's see if we can find it. Yeah, this is it. It's a little further on. Lively's contract requires her right to consult and approve on certain aspects of the film's production and marketing be exercised in a reasonable manner, and so as not to frustrate their full and timely development. So, you know, we've often talked about, we don't know what the full extent of her contract is and how much she was allowed to, and I think Blake Lively's motion to dismiss had talked about there was nothing in her contract that exclusively said she was not allowed to take over production and marketing and do the rest of the stuff, and that they encouraged her. And yeah, I mean, this is what they're admitting to. They're just saying that there are some wording in the contract to where it shouldn't interfere beyond like a reasonable manner. But again, like, you'd have to see what the actual title, text of the contract but this is the first time where they talk about it. The other interesting point is they point out here that the contract further specifies that Lively would not have the right to terminate her performance under the contract except in extremely narrow, inapplicable circumstances. Now they add in brackets here, inapplicable. Now I think, and it's very likely that that contract does have some sexual harassment or inappropriate conduct clauses. So she would be right to terminate her contract under the circumstances that she was in. They're adding that in, I think, specifically because they're again trying to make sure that they deny that any of that ever happened, which I think why that's in there. But it does actually open up the fact that a lot of people say, well, why didn't she walk away? Why didn't she quit? Why didn't she do these things? It may well be, as Wayfarer say, she might not have had the ability to tear up that contract, not without penalty. So her consistently saying, hey, you need to grant me these things or work in the way that I want, or you need to hire somebody else and cast somebody else. She may have been powerless to say, hey, you need to work in this way or I quit, right? Wayfarer actually, again, openly admitting stuff that they shouldn't need to admit or put out there. But they're doing this to basically say she threatened over and over again to terminate her performance of acting and promotional services. We haven't seen that. They've talked about this, that she kept threatening this. They haven't shown that. In the 17 protections, they don't talk about, hey, I'm going to terminate and I'm not going to do it. What they say is, we will take our legal action. All right, we will reserve our legal rights. If you don't want to do this, you don't want to give us this production, we reserve our legal rights. They were basically saying, you need to provide these if you want her to come back to set. Otherwise, we're going to go to legal action against you. They weren't saying she was going to terminate her service, though that would probably be where it ends, because they would not provide a safe working environment for her. So yeah, not great, not great. Again, like I said, on the other piece was the other piece I want to kind of go through, because we're kind of getting late now. I mean, we're 2.5 hours in. It's about time we call this. But the last piece I want to kind of go through, they talk about how her sexual harassment allegations are all false and that they've proven they're false. And they specifically call out some of them here to show that they're false. And I wanted to kind of go through these because I think it's important to kind of counter some of that misinformation and go through it. Stuff we've talked about before, but I definitely wanted to kind of come in here. So they argue here that Lively falsely claimed there was no intimacy coordinator when Lively was aware one was one engaged 6 weeks before filming. And we've talked about this like consistently. Lively never said that there was no intimacy coordinator. What she says in her complaint is Baldoni improvised physical intimacy that had not been rehearsed, choreographed, or discussed with no intimacy coordinator present. This is true. Baldoni's own timeline, again, talks about they did not have one present except for only had one on when they were doing simulated sex and nudity, which again is also not true because as they say for June 3rd, when Lively was doing the simulated nudity on June 3rd, there also wasn't one present. It seems like the only time one was present in the pre-production before the shutdown for the strike appears to be when they were filming the scenes with Isabel Ferrer in late June and July. Is it July? Might have been just late June. But when they were filming the scenes with the younger actors, that appears to be the only time the intimacy coordinator was on set. Lively has never claimed that there wasn't one at all. They say here that Lively falsely claimed that Wayfarer insisted on being around her when she was undressed and breastfeeding. That's not what she alleged in her CRD complaint. She said that they entered without permission. We've also talked about like the FAC includes a text message where he was being invited for her trailer to pump breast when she was pumping breast milk. Let's just go to that 104, I think. Nope, not this one. What's the other one? FAC, Exhibit A at 25. Oh, I don't know what that is. I'll have to go look for trailer, I guess. It's somewhere in here. Somebody know the date? Nope, come on. Yeah. I forgot. This is what he does in the timeline. He cuts out all of the message in the timeline. So this is messed up. I think we're going back to here. Let me come see trailer. Here we go. He cuts out the whole message in the timeline deliberately to not include the fact that she says, "Take your time. I'll meet you. I'm here in hair and makeup." He was never invited into the trailer. We've talked about before. Blake Lively had two trailers. She had a personal trailer she was pumping in. She had a hair and makeup trailer. Baldoni was either in the hair and makeup trailer or he was in the general cast hair and makeup trailer. He was not in the same trailer as her. He did not take this as an invitation to come to her trailer because he was not in her trailer. Like, none of this is true. They talk about Lively falsely claimed to be nearly naked. She did not. In her original CRD complaint, she talks about how those scenes are filmed nearly naked and what it involves when it was nearly naked. She talks about in here that, you know, when it was not this. Something about here. Lively was mostly nude with her legs in stirrups and only a small piece of fabric covering her. She never says that she was nearly naked. You know, when they kind of say that she was wearing briefs, which is a small piece of fabric. They're talking about the hospital gown and the pregnancy, and only a leg showed. They also don't talk about the fact that they were pressuring her to film it naked, to film it nude. Lively falsely claimed that Wayfarer hired a random friend to play the gynecologist, when in fact the actor is a Shakespeare-trained professional. That's again. She says that when Baldoni introduced his best friend to play the role instead of a local actor, and that they hadn't selected him through like an agency. Baldoni does not deny that here. All he says is the actor is a Shakespearean-trained professional. He's still his good friend, and there's photos of the two of them together. The fact that he is a professional doesn't change the fact that he did not go through the appropriate mechanism for hiring and retaining it and just got his friend to play the gyno, which, again, doing so is highly inappropriate. Lively falsely claimed that she was shown adult material. Again, that is also not true. What she says is that she thought she was shown it. No. Yeah, this is it. Thought she was being shown it and asked him to stop, and it was a video of his wife giving birth. So, like, this is the problem, is he consistently says, well, we've shown these to be false. And he's only shown it to be false by creating straw man narratives, right? By making false claims that she falsely claimed there was no intimacy coordinator when she didn't, which is a straw man. Very easy to defeat, but it's not actually what's in her CRD complaint at all. So yeah, the gist of his whole thing is that basically she doesn't get the protections of the 47.1 CRD civil code because the CRD is not what they're complaining about. Maybe I can quickly find that and we can wrap that up. This straight there. We got there straight there. Okay. So they're talking about the Wayfarer party's defamation claim against Lively arises from her statement and those of her agents to the media, WME executives, and others from July to December. The FAC does not seek to hold Lively liable for statements made in the CRD complaint or lawsuit. This is like not true. Everything they've talked about is the stuff that is said in the CRD complaint, as we showed. The one place where they're talking about, oh, she had said the 17 protections was admission of guilt is not in the New York Times article. They have not shown any of the statements that they're supposedly holding her liable for that are outside of the CRD complaint and lawsuit. They also admit that they're holding her liable for the statements made by other people, but again, have not shown anything. The only statements that they have shown in this whole defamation case is the predator comment from Ryan. That's it. That is the whole extent of their case. So I don't know how this holds up. And I'd mentioned this on Reddit. I was like, I don't know how Baldoni's whole plan here is to say that she made defamatory statements. I can't tell you what they are. I can't point to what they are. I don't know who they were made to. Other people also made them. I can't tell you what those defamatory statements are, but she needs to be held liable for them, and I want $400 million for it. What world? what world is this going to continue? So I don't know. Yeah, we'll see, I guess. So let me go back and look at the comments. I wonder if the intimacy quota heard the "that was hot" comment. I do wonder about that, Master Jinx. I wonder who it is that is going to be the witness that kind of drops that about that, or whether it was cast and crew, something about that. This is the part that bugs me, says Junk Farm, because she specifically said she undressed part was in the makeup trailer. Right, so I think it seems very clear that they kept walking into the makeup trailer, but when she was pumping in her private trailer, they knew that that was a boundary not to cross. The guy spent weeks talking about their addiction to adult material, then start to show a picture of a naked lady, and so she assumes, yeah, I mean, Justine, you know, I think I've talked about this before, like, you've got an environment in which they're openly discussing this, you know, they're openly bragging and talking about, oh, Lively has never watched adult material. You know, he's talking about his sex life, he's talking about his history with women, they're talking about, you know, girls they've dated, he's talking about, you know, his own history with it, he's talking about his addiction to adult material, and then you're shown a video where you see a woman who is unclothed, and it's, sure, it's dark, it's in water, but you don't know what you're being shown, and why would she not have that expectation that that was she was being shown, especially given. And again, this is another thing they lied about. Originally, they talked about, they showed her that video in preparation for the birthing scene, is what it says here. And then we actually heard their timeline here that she shoots the birthing scene on the 22nd of May, but they show her the video during lunch on the 23rd, which is the day after. It was not in preparation, it was after. That's wild. She also claimed we showed the screenshot. Really being glooping about what was actually said. And I think this is the problem I have, like, genuinely. A lot of people are like, well, why do you believe? Why do you not believe? Like, I really don't like the way that they strawman her and then beat that. And then a lot of people basically take what Baldoni and Wayfarer say in their legal filings and then put it out there as though it was fact without, like, just check. Is that actually what was said? And I think that's really, really frustrates me, because when you look at like that compared to what Lively put in her theater complaint, especially when you look at like the dance scene, the way that the dance scene was described, Lively's is the more accurate description of the dance scene. Baldoni straight up invents things. You know, says that she, you know, apologized for the smell. She never apologized for the smell, but he does that to make his comment about, "Ooh, you smell good," seem more normalized. He's deliberately inventing things, deliberately trying to change the context and trying to not take accountability for what he said. And I think that is, to me, indicative of like the problem that is at the core of this case. So, in front of her salad says. Okay, that was pretty fun. Yes, in front of her salad. It's wild, 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 wild. Why are we putting a pin in the idea of not being able to use Baldoni's book? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they did that. Anyway, so yeah, that's what's going on this week. So what we'll see, I guess, next week is is Jed Wallace's response to Blake Lively. We'll see, hopefully, Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively's response to Wayfarer. And I believe once that happens, everything will be done. And so I think then we'll be looking to see a timeline on Lyman giving a verdict and responding to this and starting to break this up. Again, I've talked a couple of times on this. My guess, as somebody who knows nothing about law and any of this, my guess is a bunch of this stuff will get struck down. Lyman will send it back to Wayfarer, give them leave to amend, and say, go create something coherent out of the Swiss cheese mess that has been left behind of this, just to make things easier and more expedient than trying to, you know, go through and highlight and redact pieces of the original FAC. So I don't know. We'll see. You can. I'm your liar in the end. So that's it for this week. Like I say, hopefully we'll come back to it next week. They will have those responses to motion dismissed. If not, then I will have the more in-depth look at the Jonesworks case, and we'll go through the answers there as well as the counterclaims made by Wayfarer and Able. Go through the whole spreadsheet thing, see where they answer, see where there's some differences and what they disagree with, see if there's any holes there. But other than that, I don't know. Like, I think it might start to get quiet. So we'll see if we still want to kind of do a check-in weekly, or if this turns into something else. Or if, you know, there's just a million amendments to the original complaint, and Wayfarer just keep checking out an amendment every week, and just turn it into a newsletter at that point. I don't know. We shall see. I appreciate, guys, thank you so much for coming to hang out tonight. As always, please, like, yes, Sylvain said thanks, you know, please hit the like button. Thank you, please hit the like button if you feel like dropping a comment as well, and, you know, sharing it and boosting with others. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. We'll talk about them next week. Otherwise, I appreciate it. I just saw Massey Jake say Woundworld. Woundworld on Okie Dokie's live streams always sets me off. It always sets me off. I'm going to show my ignorance here. I still don't fully understand the reference. So I need to do some digging. I know, because I saw somebody else making the reference today. So I need to go dig in, but it always makes me laugh. Anyway, all right, guys, appreciate you. Thanks so much. Have yourselves a great rest of your week, and hopefully we'll see you again